Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was reborn as Dragon God and built harem with Yasaka, DxD, Tohru, Dragon Maid, and Tiamat DxD. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Golden Roar. The first sensation was not one of light, but of falling. It was a drop through an endless, silent dark, a plummet without wind or weight. Memories, sharp and fractured like shrapnel, tore through the void with him. The acrid smell of ozone from a Chidori, the bone-deep weariness of a war that had consumed the world, the warmth of a hand in his, the gut-wrenching cold of betrayal. He saw a forest of bone-white hands reaching from desiccated earth, a moon painted with a single, bleeding eye, and the face of a friend contorted in a sorrow too deep for words. His name, he remembered, was Naruto. Naruto Uzumaki. He had been a ninja. He had fought, he had bled, and he had died. The final memory was a blinding, all-consuming light, a concussive force that had promised oblivion and delivered. But this was not oblivion. The falling stopped. He did not land so much as he simply was. The void remained, but it was no longer empty. It was a canvas, and he was the paint. A presence, ancient and vast, seeped into his consciousness, not with words, but with pure, undiluted meaning. It spoke of a soul too bright, too saturated with the hopes and energies of a world to simply dissipate. It spoke of a cycle broken, a reincarnation refused, and a rebirth forged by the raw, untamed power of a planet's dying wish. His soul, it seemed, had been the vessel, and he dregs of a cataclysmic war had been the catalyst. He had not been sent to another life. He had become one. Time lost its meaning. Was it a day, a century, a millennium? He learned to perceive the currents of this new reality. The silent hum of creation and the discordant crackle of entropy. He was a being of duality, a fulcrum upon which existence balanced. Within him, a sun of brilliant gold pulsed with the power to build worlds. To weave life from nothingness, to forge stars from will alone. Coiled around it, a serpent of abyssal violet thrummed with the power to unmake, to return all things to the silence from which they came. He was a dragon god. The concept settled into his being with the finality of a mountain range settling into the earth's crust. He gave himself a form, shaped by the echoes of a life he once knew. He stood tall, not with the gangly energy of his youth, but with the solid, grounded presence of a man who had borne the weight of a world. His hair was the color of sun-bleached gold, and his eyes, once a vibrant cerulean blue, now held the depth of the cosmos, slitted with the predatory focus of a primordial beast. He was clad in simple black pants and a high-collared, sleeveless coat that seemed spun from the very darkness of the void, trimmed with gold that shimmered with starlight. He practiced. He reached out with the golden energy, and a star bloomed in the darkness. Its nascent light warm against his new skin. He flexed his will, and the star collapsed, devoured by a whisper of violet energy, leaving not even dust behind. He learned to fly, not by pushing against the air, but by commanding space to bend to his passage. He learned to roar, and the sound was not mere noise, but a force that could shatter the fabric of reality itself. He was powerful, he was eternal, and he was utterly, profoundly alone. The loneliness was a familiar ache, a ghost from his first life that had followed him into this one. Power was meaningless without purpose, without someone to share it with, without someone to protect. It was this thought, this deep-seated, unshakable part of his very being, that finally pushed him outward. He focused, casting his senses beyond the comfortable confines of his timeless void. He felt everything, the slow, patient spin of galaxies, the birth of stars, the silent death of suns. He narrowed his search, looking for the telltale spark of life, of will, of emotion. He found countless worlds, teeming with beings of every shape and size. But one called to him, a vibrant, chaotic jewel humming with a strange and potent energy he had not felt before. It felt like the nature energy of his old world, but wilder, sharper, and compartmentalized into countless different flavors. He pushed his consciousness toward it, and the void gave way to a riot of color and sound. He found himself hovering, unseen and unfelt, high in the stratosphere of a world that was both alien and achingly familiar. He saw vast oceans, sprawling continents, and cities that glittered like scattered diamonds in the night. But it was a specific point of light that drew his attention. A concentration of power and emotion, centered on a city nestled in a basin between verdant mountains. The energy was warm, protective, and fierce, but it was also strained, like a shield wall about to buckle. Beneath it, a cacophony of malice and bloodlust festered, a discordant screech against the world's vibrant hum. He descended, folding space around him until he materialized within the dense canopy of an ancient forest, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and cedar. The trees were massive, their trunks wider than houses, their leaves 100 shades of green. For the first time in an age, he felt solid ground beneath his feet. The sensation was grounding, real. He took a step, and the forest fell silent. The chirping of insects, the rustling of unseen creatures, all of it ceased, replaced by a profound, instinctual hush. The natural world recognized a predator of the highest order. The sounds of battle reached him then, not as a whisper on the wind, but as a tremor in the very fabric of the world's energy. Explosions of crimson and black light, screams that were cut short, the defiant cry of a warrior against impossible odds. He moved. The forest became a blur of green and brown, the ground barely registering his passage. He burst through the tree line onto a scene of controlled chaos. He was on the outskirts of a city, its traditional, elegant architecture a stark contrast to the violence unfolding before it. A shimmering barrier of golden energy, intricate and complex, flickered over the city, but cracks were beginning to form, spider webbing across its surface. Before the barrier, a battle raged. On one side, stood a cohort of what he could only describe as yokai, creatures of myth and legend. Kitsune with multiple tails, their fur blazing with foxfire. Tengu with feathered wings, wielding blades of pure wind. Onus with skin the color of stone. Their cannibal clubs crushing the earth. Their enemies were a grotesque legion. Twisted, malformed creatures with too many limbs, their bodies pulsing with a volatile, chaotic energy. They were devils, he surmised, but feral and broken, strays from any sensible hierarchy. They shrieked and clawed, driven by nothing but hunger and a desire to destroy. Leading the defense was a figure of breathtaking power and grace. A woman with the ears and 9 flowing tails of a golden kitsune. She was clad in the ornate robes of a miko, her long blonde hair dancing around her as she moved. Her hands wove signs of immense complexity, unleashing torrents of golden light that incinerated dozens of the stray devils at a time. Each movement was precise, each decision calculated to protect her people. She was a queen defending her castle, a mother protecting her children. But she was tiring. He could see it in the slight tremor of her hands, the sheen of sweat on her brow. The enemy was endless, a tide of mindless beasts crashing against her and her warriors. The barrier over the city flickered violently as 3 particularly large strays, monstrosities of fused flesh and jagged bone, slammed into it in unison. A large crack appeared directly over the city's central pagoda. The kitsune's head snapped up, her golden eyes wide with alarm. She had to choose. Enforce the barrier or protect her warriors who were being overwhelmed. It was an impossible choice, and her hesitation was all the enemy needed. A swarm of smaller, faster strays broke through a weakened flank, heading directly for a group of young, terrified kitsune who were struggling to hold their ground. The queen cried out, a sound of frustration and fear. She was too far away. Her warriors were too engaged. Naruto moved. He didn't run. He didn't fly. He simply was. One moment he was at the edge of the forest, the next he was standing between the charging strays and their intended victims. He hadn't drawn a weapon. He hadn't gathered energy. He just stood there, his hands in his pockets, his cosmic eyes taking in the snarling, drooling faces of the beasts before him. They skidded to a halt, their mindless bloodlust momentarily overridden by a primal, instinctual terror that screamed at them from the very core of their being. They weren't looking at a man. They were looking at an apex predator. A being so far beyond their comprehension that their corrupted minds couldn't process it. They saw the end of all things standing before them in a simple black coat. One, perhaps braver or simply stupider than the rest, let out a piercing shriek and lunged, its claws extended, dripping with black ichor. Naruto didn't even look at it. He raised a hand, his palm open, and a soft, golden light bloomed from its center. It wasn't a blast. It wasn't an explosion. It was a wave, an unstoppable tide of pure, benevolent creation energy. When it washed over the stray, the creature didn't scream. It simply ceased to be corrupted. The chaotic, malevolent energy that fueled it was unwritten, overridden by the fundamental code of life. For a brief, shining moment, the creature's form reverted to that of the human it had once been, a look of profound peace on its face, before it dissolved into harmless motes of light that drifted away on the breeze. The other strays recoiled, a wave of fear rippling through their ranks. Naruto's gaze swept over them, and in that instant, they felt the full, crushing weight of his presence. It was not the arrogant pressure of a king or the fiery rage of a warlord. It was the absolute, unyielding pressure of a fundamental law of the universe. It was the certainty of the sun rising, the finality of a star collapsing into a black hole. He spoke, his voice calm. Yet it carried across the battlefield, silencing all other sound. You have defiled this place with your presence. You have threatened those who are under my sight. Your existence is an error. He lifted his other hand. And from this one, a sphere of abyssal violet, no larger than a marble, coalesced. It drank the light, pulling the very color from the air around it. It was the antithesis of the golden light, a perfect, beautiful void. Be corrected. He flicked his wrist, and the sphere shot forward. It did not explode on impact. It passed through the first rank of strays, and where it touched, there was nothing. No blood, no ash, no sound. Just absence. A perfect, clean erasure. It carved a perfectly straight, perfectly silent path through the entire horde, continuing on until it struck the base of a distant, lifeless mountain. The mountain did not crumble or explode. The lower half of it simply vanished, causing the peak to drop straight down with a cataclysmic boom that shook the very foundations of the earth. Silence. The battlefield was frozen. The yokai stared, their weapons held slack in their hands. The remaining strays trembled, their mindless rage completely extinguished, replaced by a terror so absolute it bordered on catatonia. The Kitsune Queen, Yasaka, lowered her hands, her golden eyes fixed on the man who had appeared from nowhere. She felt his power. It was like standing next to two suns, one that gave life and one that took it away. It was immense, primordial, and utterly untamed. Yet, he had used it to save her people. He stood before them like a living shield, an impossible guardian who had turned the tide with two simple gestures. Naruto glanced back over his shoulder, his slitted eyes meeting hers. There was no arrogance in his gaze, no demand for tribute or worship. There was only a calm, quiet assessment, and perhaps, a hint of a question. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of reassurance. Then he turned back to the remaining strays. Leave, he commanded, the word resonating not in their ears, but in their souls. Or stay and be unmade. For a moment, none moved. Then, as one, they broke. They turned and fled, trampling over one another in their desperate, panicked scramble to get away from him. They fled not as a retreating army, but as prey from a hunter that had decided to let them go. The battlefield fell silent once more. The only sounds the heavy breathing of the yokai warriors and the gentle rustle of the wind through the ancient trees. Naruto let his hands fall to his sides, the golden and violet energies fading as if they had never been. The immediate threat was gone. He looked around, at the cratered earth, the weary but living defenders, and the beautiful, traditional city that they had fought so hard to protect. It felt right to protect, to stand for others. It was a feeling he hadn't realized he had missed until this very moment. He felt a presence approach from behind and turned. The Kitsune Queen, Yasaka, walked toward him, her 9 golden tails swaying gently behind her. Her expression was one of awe, caution, and profound gratitude. Her guards moved to flank her, their hands still on their weapons. But she waved them back with a simple gesture. She stopped a respectful distance away and bowed deeply, a gesture of supreme respect. I am Yasaka, leader of the yokai faction of Kyoto, she said. Her voice clear and melodic, holding the authority of a ruler. You have saved my city and my people. We are in your debt. May I ask the name of our savior? He looked at her, at the genuine gratitude in her eyes, at the strength that radiated from her despite her exhaustion. He saw a leader, a protector, a kindred spirit. For the first time since his rebirth, a genuine, small smile touched his lips. It felt as foreign and as welcome as the solid ground beneath his feet. "My name is Naruto," he said, and the name felt right on his tongue, a bridge bet. In the life he had lost and the one he was just beginning. Just Naruto. One of the larger stray devils, the fused monstrosity that had helped crack the barrier, had not fled with the others. It had been stunned, its brutish mind overwhelmed, but now its rage was returning. With a guttural roar, it charged, not at Naruto, but at Yasaka, seeing her as the softer target. Yasaka's eyes widened, her energy reserves too low to mount a proper defense in time. Naruto didn't even turn, he simply lifted his left hand behind him, snapping his fingers. A tiny spark of violet energy, the same that had erased the mountain, appeared directly in the charging monster's path. The beast's forward momentum carried it right into the spark. There was no sound, no impact. The front half of the monster simply ceased to exist. Its back legs continued to run for 2 more steps before collapsing into a pile of inert flesh and bone, the clean, perfect line of its bisection a testament to an absolute and terrifying power. Before the corpse had even settled, a stray that had been hiding amongst the trees, a chameleon-like creature, suddenly lunged from the canopy. It was a high-level assassin, far more intelligent than the others. It hadn't been part of the main force but had been waiting for this exact opportunity, the moment of relief after a battle. Its target was clear, the strange man who commanded such power. Its claws, laced with a potent neurotoxin capable of paralyzing even a high-class devil, were inches from Naruto's neck when it froze. The air around it had become as thick as solid stone, locking it in place. Naruto slowly turned his head, his cosmic eyes locking onto the would-be assassin. He hadn't used his draconic power. This was something else, a remnant of a different life. A suffocating, immense pressure slammed down on the creature. It was pure killing intent, honed over a lifetime of war, now amplified by the sheer force of a god's will. The stray's eyes bulged, its mind shattering under the weight of that malevolent pressure. It saw flashes of a 9-tailed fox of pure hatred, of armies clashing, of a world bathed in blood. A thin trickle of black ichor dripped from its snout. It died of pure, unadulterated fear, its body going limp in the air before slumping to the ground. Naruto let the pressure recede. He glanced at the dead creature, then back at Yasaka, who had her hand over her mouth. Her eyes wide with a new level of understanding. She had sensed the power of creation and destruction, but that had been the naked will of a warrior, an intent to kill so pure and so overwhelming it was a weapon in itself. One of the strays that had been fleeing, a lesser beast caught at the edge of that killing intent, collapsed to the ground, its limbs twitching as its corrupted mind gave out. Before it could expire, it began to mutter, its voice a low, raspy gurgle. "The master, he will come. The silence will come. He who devours gods will come for the golden light." Naruto's head snapped toward the sound. He was beside the dying stray in an instant, his eyes narrowed. "What master? Who is coming?" The stray just gurgled, a black foam frothing at its mouth. Its eyes rolling back into its head before it fell silent, its life force extinguished. "He who devours gods." The silence. The words hung in the air, a chilling premonition that settled deep in Naruto's soul. This wasn't just a random attack. It was a symptom of something far more dangerous. He stood up, his gaze sweeping over the horizon as if he could see the threads of fate. He had come to this world seeking a place to belong. But it seemed he had found a battle to fight instead. Perhaps, for him, they were one and the same. He turned back to Yasaka. The caution in her eyes was now mixed with a deep, profound respect. This man wasn't just a force of nature. He was a warrior, a guardian, and a king all in one. The sheer breadth of his abilities was staggering. "It seems your troubles are not over," Naruto stated. His voice low. Yasaka finally found her voice, lowering her hand. "No," she said, her tone regaining its regal composure, though a hint of weariness remained. "It would seem they have just begun." She looked at him, a decision solidifying in her gaze. An alliance with such a being was not just an advantage, it was a necessity. "Naruto dono. You said you were just Naruto. You have no affiliation, no home." "Not anymore," he replied, his gaze distant for a moment before returning to her. "I am new to this world." That explained both everything and nothing. Then, on behalf of the Yokai of Kyoto, I would be honored if you would accept our hospitality, Yasaka offered, her voice firm, leaving no room for refusal. Stay with us. Rest. We owe you a debt that can never be fully repaid. But we can at least offer you a place of welcome. A home, if you will have it. A home. The word resonated within him, striking a chord that had been silent for an age. He looked at her, at the city behind her, at the people who were now cautiously emerging, their faces filled with relief and awe. He had acted on instinct, on the deep-seated need to protect the innocent that had defined his first life. And in doing so, he had found the one thing he had been searching for. A connection, a purpose. He gave her a genuine, warm smile this time, a flash of the bright, charismatic boy he had once been. Now backed by the power of a god. The effect was dazzling, and Yasaka felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with her own power. I accept, Naruto said. Thank you, Yasaka. As her warriors let out a ragged but heartfelt cheer, Yasaka watched the man who called himself Naruto. He stood amidst the devastation his power had wrought, yet he looked not like a destroyer, but like a guardian standing at the gates, his presence a promise of safety. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her soul, that the world had changed today. A new player had stepped onto the board, one whose power could shatter the game itself. And for now, he was on her side. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. A Fox's Hospitality. The walk into Kyoto was surreal. For Naruto, it was a step into a living, breathing memory twisted into something new. The architecture was achingly familiar. The elegant sweep of tiled roofs, the sturdy grace of wooden pagodas, the serene beauty of rock gardens and koi ponds. It was the Konoha he remembered, but grander, more ancient, and imbued with an energy that hummed just beneath the surface of reality. This was a city not just built on the earth, but woven into its spiritual fabric. The people, the yokai, were a marvel. He walked at Yasaka's side, her personal guard forming a respectful perimeter, and saw a world he'd only read about in scrolls. A young kitsune girl with 3 fluffy tails chasing a ball of pure foxfire down an alleyway, her laughter like tinkling bells. A stoic tengu with crow-black wings perched atop a torii gate, his gaze sharp and watchful. A portly tanuki in a simple kimono, cheerfully directing newcomers toward a tavern from which the sounds of revelry spilled out into the street. They were not monsters. They were people. They bowed their heads as Yasaka passed, their reverence for their leader absolute. But their gazes lingered on him, a mixture of awe, fear, and intense curiosity. He was the olden god who had appeared from the forest, the being who had unmade a mountain with a flick of his wrist. He could feel their whispers in the currents of the air, the questions they were too afraid to ask. He was led not to a fortress or a palace, but to a sprawling, elegant estate at the heart of the city. It was a labyrinth of polished wooden corridors, paper-thin shoji screens painted with scenes of mythic battles, and serene inner courtyards where miniature waterfalls trickled into stone basins. The air was thick with the scent of cherry blossoms and old cedar. This will be your residence for as long as you wish to stay, Yasaka said, her voice echoing slightly in the main hall. She gestured to the spacious, airy rooms. My own quarters are in the adjoining wing. The city is yours to explore, though I suspect for now you will be the main attraction. It's more than I could have asked for, Naruto replied, his gaze sweeping over a screen depicting a 9-tailed fox battling a monstrous, 8-headed serpent. Thank you. It is the least we can do, she insisted, turning to face him fully. Her golden eyes were serious, the weight of her leadership settling back onto her shoulders. Tonight, my advisors and I will hold a dinner in your honor. It will be a chance for us to formally thank you, and to speak of the future. The threat you helped us repel is not an isolated one. Naruto nodded, his own expression becoming grim. He who devours gods, he murmured, the words of the dying stray echoing in his mind. The silence, a flicker of something, recognition, fear, crossed Yasaka's face. You heard the name. From one of the strays before it died, he confirmed. It is a name we have only heard in whispers, Yasaka said, her voice dropping. Rumors of a new faction. One that operates in the shadows between the territories of devils, angels, and fallen. They hunt beings of immense power, leaving nothing behind but silence. We believed them to be a myth, a ghost story to frighten young yokai. Today proved us wrong. They have a leader, Naruto added. Someone who directs them. We know nothing of this, Master, she admitted, a hint of frustration in her tone. But if his minions are capable of mounting an assault of this scale, he must be a being of considerable power. Their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. The battle was over, but the war was just beginning. Later that evening, Naruto sat on the Engawa, the polished wooden veranda, overlooking a meticulously raked Zen garden. The moon was a perfect silver disk in the night sky, its light casting long, soft shadows across the white sand. He wore simple, dark robes provided by his hosts, feeling a strange sense of peace he hadn't known was possible. He could feel the life of the city around him. The low hum of conversation, the distant melody of a shamisen, the quiet, ever-present thrum of spiritual energy that was the city's heartbeat. It was a far cry from the roaring silence of the void he had called home. He thought of his past, of the friends he had lost, the world he had failed to save. The pain was still there, a dull, familiar ache in the core of his being. But it was no longer all-consuming. Here, now, there was a new purpose stirring. A city to protect, a leader who carried the same burdens he once had, a new enemy to face. It was a role he understood. A soft shuffling sound brought him back to the present. Yasaka approached, her 9 tails fanning out behind her like a golden cape in the moonlight. She had changed from her Miko robes into an elegant, deep blue kimono embroidered with silver cranes. She carried a small tray with a ceramic flask and 2 small cups. I thought you might appreciate a moment of peace before the formalities, she said. Her voice softer than it had been earlier. She knelt gracefully beside him, pouring a clear, fragrant liquid into the 2 cups. Our finest sake, brewed with water from the sacred mountain spring. Thank you, Naruto said. Accepting the cup, he took a sip, and a pleasant warmth spread through him. It tasted of clean water, sweet rice, and something else, a faint, tingling trace of nature energy. They sat in a comfortable silence for a long moment, watching the moon. You fight like someone who has known war your entire life, Yasaka said finally, her gaze fixed on the garden. Yet you say you are new to this world. It is a contradiction I cannot resolve. Naruto swirled the sake in his cup. I come from a world that was very different. It was smaller, sharper, and it was consumed by a war that left nothing behind. My rebirth here was not a choice. Rebirth. Her curiosity was piqued. I died, he stated simply, without a trace of self-pity. My soul was too stubborn to fade. She clung to the last vestiges of my world's energy and became what I am now. He looked at her, his cosmic eyes seeming to hold the light of distant nebulae. I am the ghost of a dead world, Yasaka. The admission was stark, and filled with a loneliness so profound it made her heart ache. She saw past the godlike power to the core of the man beside her, someone who had lost everything. A ghost, perhaps, she said softly. But you saved my people. Here, in this world, you are a guardian. That is no small thing. She took a sip of her own sake. You never told me what to call you. Naruto is your given name. But a being of your stature, do you have a title? He considered it for a moment, then a small, wry smile touched his lips. In my old life, they called me many things. Idiot, knucklehead, hero, demon. He took another drink. But what I am now? I suppose you could call me a dragon god. Though I've never been much for fancy titles. Before Yasaka could process the casual claim of godhood, the very fabric of the night shattered. It started as a tremor, a vibration in the air that made the sake in their cups ripple. Then, a sound, a high-pitched, tearing shriek that seemed to rip a hole in reality. High above the estate, the sky cracked. A jagged, kaleidoscopic fissure of chaotic energy opened up, and something shot out of it like a cannonball, trailing smoke and sparks of emerald light. The object, a screaming streak of green and blonde, slammed into the center of the Zen garden with the force of a meteor. Sand, gravel, and stone lanterns were thrown into the air as a massy crater was gouged out of the pristine landscape. Alarms blared across the city. Yukai guards were instantly in motion, weapons drawn, surrounding the impact site. Naruto and Yasaka were on their feet in an instant. The peaceful moment shattered. From the center of the crater, a figure rose, shaking debris from her shoulders. She was a young woman, dressed in a prim, collared maid outfit, complete with a frilly apron and headpiece. But the image was ruined by the massive, green, draconic tail lashing angrily behind her and the pair of curved, formidable horns jutting from her blonde hair, which was tied in twin tails. Her eyes, a vibrant reddish-orange, glowed with fury and disorientation. "Damn you, Elma," she roared, her voice filled with frustration. "Sabotaging my portal. When I get back I'm going to grill you." Her furious gaze then swept the area, taking in the shocked Yukai guards and the elegant estate. Finally, her eyes locked onto Naruto. Her rage faltered, replaced by a sudden, sharp intake of breath. Her draconic senses were screaming at her. The being standing on the veranda wasn't a Yukai. He wasn't a human. He was a dragon. The power rolling off him in waves was immense, ancient, and utterly alien. It was far stronger than Lord End, more primal than her own father, the Emperor of Demise. Her battle-honed instincts, forged in a war between dragon factions, took over. This had to be a trick. A secret weapon of the Harmony faction, sent to ambush her. "So," the dragon maid snarled, pointing an accusatory finger at Naruto, "the goody two-shoes Harmony F. Actions have stooped to sending assassins after me. You have a powerful aura, I'll give you that, but I am Tohru of the Chaos faction. Prepare to be annihilated." With a roar, she lunged. She moved with impossible speed. Her fist cocked back, wreathed in green flames. The Yukai guards tensed, ready to die defending their queen, but Yasaka held up a hand, her eyes locked on Naruto. He hadn't moved. He simply watched the approaching dragon with a look of mild curiosity. As her flaming fist was about to connect with his face, he sighed, a sound of faint exasperation. "Not even one quiet evening," he muttered. He raised one hand. He didn't meet her punch. He simply caught her wrist. The resulting shockwave was silent but immense. The air around them warped. The paving stones beneath Tohru's feet cracked and spider-webbed. The flames around her fist were extinguished as if they had never existed. Tohru stared, her eyes wide with disbelief. He had stopped her full-force punch, a blow that could shatter a mountain, with one hand. Effortlessly. He wasn't even straining. "Chaos faction, Harmony faction?" Naruto asked, his voice calm and even. "I have no idea what you're talking about." Frustrated and enraged, Tohru let out another roar and opened her mouth. A torrent of destructive, emerald green fire erupted from her throat, a blast hot enough to melt steel into slag, aimed directly at Naruto's face. Naruto didn't flinch. He didn't even let go of her wrist. He simply opened his own mouth and inhaled. The entire column of dragon fire, a cataclysmic force of nature, was sucked into his mouth as if he were sipping tea. He swallowed, a faint golden light flickering in the back of his throat. He blinked. "A bit spicy," he commented, a trail of smoke curling from his lips. "But not bad." Tohru's jaw dropped. The Yukai guards stared in stunned silence. Yasaka felt a bead of sweat trickle down her temple. She had seen him erase a mountain, but this casual display of absolute immunity was somehow even more terrifying. He had eaten a dragon's breath attack. "That's impossible," Tohru stammered, her rage replaced by a creeping sense of dread. "Is it?" Naruto tilted his head. "You're a long way from home. You're hurt, and you're lashing out at the first thing you see." With his free hand, he gently tapped her on the forehead. A spark of pure, golden energy flowed from his finger into her. It wasn't an attack. It was a wave of calming, healing power. It washed over her, soothing the ragged edges of her own energy, mending the minor injuries she'd sustained from her rough portal transit, and clearing the disorientation from her mind. Tohru's body went slack, the tension and aggression draining out of her in a rush. She felt calm. The battle lust was gone, replaced by a profound weariness and a sense of overwhelming confusion. She looked at the man holding her wrist, at his slitted, cosmic eyes that held no malice, only a kind of weary understanding. You're not with the Harmony faction," she whispered, the realization dawning on her. "I'm not with any faction," Naruto replied, finally releasing her wrist. "I'm just a guy who was trying to have a quiet drink." He glanced at the ruined garden. Emphasis on trying. Tohru looked at the crater she had made, then at the shocked faces of the Yukai, and finally at the powerful Kitsune Queen standing beside Naruto. A deep blush spread across her face. She had just attacked a being of unimaginable power and destroyed his garden in a fit of misplaced rage. She immediately dropped into a perfect, formal bow. her forehead nearly touching the ground. "I am so very sorry," she wailed, her voice filled with mortification. "It was a misunderstanding. I am a fool. Please forgive my rudeness. I will repair the garden. I will do anything. Please don't eat me." Naruto blinked at the sudden, 180-degree shift in her personality. One moment, she was a raging engine of destruction, the next, a groveling, terrified maid. It was, oddly endearing. He chuckled, a warm, genuine sound that surprised even himself. "I'm not going to eat you." Yasaka, recovering from her shock, stepped forward, her regal composure returning. "You are a dragon," she stated, looking at Tohru. "From another world, like Naruto Dono." "Yes, ma'am," Tohru squeaked, still bowing. "Tohru, at your service. I'm a chaos dragon, and I seem to be lost." Naruto looked from the deeply bowing dragon maid to the elegant kitsune queen. His quiet evening had been ruined. His garden was destroyed, and his peaceful sanctuary had just gained a new, incredibly chaotic resident. He looked at Tohru, who was now trembling slightly, clearly terrified of what he might do to her. He saw not a threat, but another lost soul, cast adrift in a world that wasn't hers. Just like him, he sighed again, but this time, it was a sigh of resignation, with a hint of amusement. His life, it seemed, was never destined to be simple. "Get up," he said to Tohru. "You're not in any trouble." He then looked at Yasaka, a wry smile on his face. "It seems, Your Highness, that your hospitality will need to be extended to one more guest." Yasaka looked at the crater, then at the powerful but clearly harmless dragon maid, and finally at the dragon god who seemed to be collecting strays from other dimensions. A small, elegant smile graced her own lips. "It would appear so," she agreed. "Our dinner party is getting more interesting by the minute." Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Scales of Truth. The sun had barely crested the eastern mountains, painting the sky in hues of soft rose and brilliant orange, when the first explosion rocked the estate. Naruto was instantly awake, moving from a meditative trance to his feet in a single fluid motion. He was on the Ingawa in a heartbeat, his senses spreading out like a net, searching for a threat. He found one, but it wasn't what he expected. In the main courtyard, where servants were meant to be sweeping fallen leaves, a whirlwind of emerald energy and pink cherry blossoms was wreaking havoc. At the center of it stood Tohru. She was dressed in her immaculate maid outfit, a determined frown on her face as she held a duster like a scepter. "Be cleansed, you stubborn agents of entropy," she declared to a patch of dust on a stone railing. She flicked the duster, and a small, concentrated orb of chaos magic shot out, missed the railing entirely, and blasted a perfectly round, 3-foot-wide hole through a nearby shoji screen. "Whoops," she muttered, her cheeks flushing. Several Yukai servants were huddled by the kitchens, peering out with expressions of pure terror. Naruto felt a headache forming behind his eyes. He landed softly in the courtyard, the displaced air barely stirring the leaves. "Tohru," he said, his voice deceptively calm. She jumped, spinning around with a guilty look. "Ah, Master Naruto. Good morning. I was just performing my morning duties as your personal maid." This place was simply filthy. Naruto looked around at the pristine, meticulously maintained courtyard, now marred by a smoking crater where a decorative pond used to be and several new, unplanned windows in the walls. "It looks clean now," he said dryly. "And ventilated." "Indeed." Tohru beamed, completely missing his sarcasm. "As your maid, it is my sworn duty to ensure your living space is a paradise of cleanliness and comfort. I will not allow a single mote of dust to mar your divine presence." Before he could respond, Yasaka arrived, moving with a silent, regal grace. She took in the scene with a single glance, her expression unreadable. "Tohru-san," she said, her voice a smooth melody that somehow cut through the lingering crackle of chaos energy. "In Kyoto, we find that a simple broom often suffices." Tohru deflated slightly. "But that's so inefficient. My method purifies on a conceptual level. It also purifies our walls on a structural level," Yasaka countered gently. She turned to Naruto. "My apologies, Naruto Dono. It seems our guest is enthusiastic." "She's something," Naruto agreed. He looked at Tohru's earnest, desperate to please face and found he couldn't be angry. It was like scolding a puppy for chewing through a wall. A puppy that could breathe Armageddon. Tohru, I appreciate the effort, really. But maybe, let's tone down the conceptual purification, for now. How about you help with breakfast instead? Tohru's eyes lit up as if he'd just offered her the crown of a kingdom. Breakfast. Of course. The most important meal to begin a day of serving you. I shall prepare a feast fit for a god. My specialty is roasted dragon tail. She paused, looking at her own lashing tail thoughtfully. Though, I suppose using my own tail would be poor form. She zipped off toward the kitchens, leaving a trail of green sparks and a palpable wave of fear from the yokai chefs who saw her coming. Naruto sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. This is my life now, isn't it? Yasaka allowed a small, amused smile to grace her lips. She is lively. I will arrange for the damages to be repaired. Her smile faded, replaced by the familiar weight of leadership. Quote, the Council of Elders will be joining us for the dinner tonight. They are anxious to meet you. Anxious, or suspicious? Naruto asked, his gaze sharp. Both, Yasaka admitted. They saw your power. They are grateful for your intervention. But they are also afraid. The yokai have a long history of being subjugated by more powerful beings. They fear trading one master for another. I'm not here to be anyone's master, Naruto stated, his voice flat and absolute. I believe you, she said, her golden eyes sincere. But they are old, and they remember a time when gods walked the earth with impunity. You will have to convince them. The dinner was an exercise in restrained tension. It was held in the grand hall of Yasaka's estate, a vast room with a burnished wooden floor and a high ceiling supported by thick beams of dark cedar. The air was heavy with the scent of incense and expensive cuisine. Naruto sat at the head of the long, low table, with Yasaka on his right and a still vibratingly excited Tohru on his left. Lining the table were the yokai elders. There was an ancient kitsune with fur the color of snow and 11 tails, her eyes holding the wisdom of centuries. There was a hulking oni, his skin the color of gray stone, his single horn polished to a shine, who looked at Naruto with unconcealed appraisal. And there was the most vocal of the group, an old Tengu with a long, prominent nose and piercing eyes. His black wings folded neatly behind him. His name was Kageyama. From the moment Naruto had entered, Kageyama's gaze had been like a physical weight. After the initial pleasantries and a formal, lengthy thank you for his role in the battle, the old Tengu leaned forward, his voice a dry rustle of old parchment. Naruto Dono, he began, his tone deceptively respectful. Your power is undeniable. You saved our city, and for that, you have the eternal gratitude of the Tengu. However, such power is a force that shapes the world around it, whether it intends to or not. What, precisely, are your intentions toward Kyoto? Naruto picked up a piece of grilled fish with his chopsticks, his movements unhurried. I intend to eat this fish, he said calmly. Then I intend to have some of that sake. Beyond that, my intentions are to live. The Oni elder let out a low chuckle, but Kageyama's expression tightened. A clever deflection. But you are no simple wanderer. You call yourself a dragon god. Gods have desires. They have ambitions. What are yours? Peace, Naruto said, his cosmic eyes meeting the Tengu's without wavering. A place to belong. A world that doesn't try to tear itself apart every other day. I had that taken from me once. I have no desire to rule your city, Kageyama-san. I only wish to protect it, because its leader was gracious enough to offer me a home when I had none. His sincerity was palpable, a tangible force in the room. The 11-tailed kitsune elder nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on her face. A noble sentiment, Kageyama conceded. But power demands purpose. What happens when a threat appears that is too great for us? Will you intervene again? And what price will you ask for that intervention? The price will be the same as last time, Naruto said, putting down his chopsticks. Nothing. I don't protect people because I want a reward. I do it because it's the right thing to do. Because no one should have to live in fear. An admirable philosophy. A new voice cut in, smooth as silk and cold as a grave. But ultimately, a naive one. Every head in the room snapped toward the entrance of the hall. Standing there, as if he had materialized from the shadows themselves, was a man. He was dressed in a simple, dark gray kimono, his long, silver hair tied back in a loose ponytail. His face was unnervingly beautiful, almost androgynous. And his eyes were closed, a serene, almost beatific smile on his lips. He held no weapon. He projected no discernible aura. But his very presence made the air grow cold, the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to deepen and writhe. Yasaka was on her feet instantly, her 9 tails bristling, a golden aura flaring to life around her. "Who are you? How did you get past my guards?" The man's smile widened. "Your guards are having a lovely, shared dream at the moment. A dream of a peaceful afternoon with no intruders. As for who I am," he opened his eyes. They were a solid, milky white, with no iris or pupil. They seemed to look past everyone, seeing something else entirely. "My name is Phantasm, and I am a humble servant of the silence." The name dropped into the room like a block of ice. Kageyama and the other elders recoiled, their faces pale. Naruto's eyes narrowed. He looked at the man, Phantasm, and felt nothing. No malice, no killing intent, no energy signature. It was like looking at a hole in the world. This was not a creature of power, but of anti-power. "You've come for me," Naruto stated. It wasn't a question. "Indeed," Phantasm said, his milky eyes fixing on Naruto. "The master is most intrigued by you. A brilliant, golden light of creation in a world so full of noise. He believes all things should return to the perfect, beautiful silence. Your existence is an affront to that ideal. He has sent me to correct you." Tohru, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, slammed her fists on the table, her draconic power flaring. "You want to fight Master Naruto? You'll have to go through me, you creepy, no-eyed weirdo." Phantasm's smile never faltered. A chaos dragon. How wonderfully noisy. He raised a single, elegant hand. "But I think not." The world dissolved. One moment, Naruto was in the dining hall. The next, he was standing in a valley of rubble under a blood-red sky. The air was thick with the stench of death and burnt chakra. Across from him stood Sasuke. His arm a lightning-wreathed blade, his eyes a swirling vortex of red and black. "You should have killed me then, Naruto," his friend snarled. "You were always too weak." It was a memory, a phantom. He knew it was an illusion, but the pain, the regret, the bone-deep sorrow it conjured were real. He felt the attack before he saw it. Not an attack on his body, but on his soul. A needle of pure despair, trying to pierce the core of his being, to poison him with his own failures. He closed his eyes. This is not real. He reached inward, not to the brilliant Su-en of creation or the abyssal serpent of destruction, but to the quiet, unshakable center that was simply him. The stubborn, indomitable will of Naruto Uzumaki. He opened his eyes, and they blazed with golden light. "I am not the man I was," he declared, his voice echoing with the power of a god. The illusion shattered like glass, the valley of the end dissolving back into the grand hall. But things had changed. Phantasm was gone. The elders were slumped over the table, their eyes glassy, lost in their own dream worlds. Yasaka was on one knee, clutching her head, her golden aura flickering as she fought a psychic assault. Tohru was rampaging, blasting walls with emerald fire, screaming Elma's name, clearly trapped in a loop of her own personal rivalry. Phantasm's voice echoed from all around them, disembodied and serene. "Your will is strong, Dragon God. Stronger than anticipated. But your companions are not so resilient. I will peel them away from you, one by one, until you are alone. And in that solitude, you will welcome the silence." A wave of psychic energy, sharp and cold, lanced toward Yasaka. Naruto moved. He appeared before her in an instant, his hand outstretched. He didn't block the attack. He simply caught it, the invisible psychic force crackling against his palm like static electricity. He clenched his fist, and the attack was crushed into nothingness. "Get out of their heads," Naruto growled, his voice a low thunder. "As you wish," Phantasm's voice replied, sounding amused. Suddenly, Tohru's rampage stopped. She blinked, her head clearing. "Master Naruto." "What?" Her eyes widened as a shimmering silver chain erupted from the floor, wrapping around her torso and arms. It pulsed with a strange energy that seemed to sap her strength. "What is this?" Another chain shot out, wrapping around Yasaka. She cried out as her connection to the city's spiritual energy was severed. "These are the chains of Somnus," Phantasm's voice explained. "Forged in the heart of a sleeping nightmare. They do not bind the body. They bind the will." The more you struggle, the deeper you will fall into the slumber of despair. Naruto turned, his eyes scanning the hall, but Phantasm was nowhere to be seen. He was hiding, a spider in a web of illusions and mental attacks. You hide in the shadows, Naruto called out, because you know you cannot face me in the light. A practical observation, Phantasm replied. Why face a sun when one can simply snuff it out? From the center of the room, the shadows coalesced, swirling together to form a vortex of pure darkness. It was not the ordered, potent void of Naruto's destruction energy. This was a messy, hungry darkness, a cancer on reality itself. And from its center, something was being pulled through. The object that emerged was a shard of crystal, no larger than a human heart. It was the color of a starless midnight sky, and it seemed to drink the light from the room, pulsing with a terrifying, alien power. The shard of the void sea. Phantasm's voice whispered with reverence. A fragment of the place between worlds. With this, I will not just erase you. I will unexist you. The shard flared, and a wave of absolute nullity spread through the hall. It didn't destroy, it unmade. The polished floorboards it washed over didn't burn or break. They simply ceased to be, leaving behind a patch of nothing. Naruto met the wave with his own power. He slammed his palm onto the floor, and a wave of brilliant gold, the very essence of creation, rushed forward to meet the unmaking. Gold and black met in the center of the hall. There was no explosion, no grand concussive force. There was only a terrible, grinding silence as the two fundamental, opposing forces annihilated each other, the line between them wavering like a heat haze. It was a battle of pure will. But even as he pushed back against the shard's power, Naruto felt a sharp, cold sting in the back of his neck. He whirled around, but there was nothing there. Phantasm had struck from within his own shadow, a psychic blade laced with the shard's nullifying energy. The wound was small, but it did not bleed. A creeping numbness began to spread from it, his golden energy sputtering around the point of impact like water on oil. It is done, Phantasm's voice whispered, now right behind him. The real Phantasm materialized, his hand still extended from the strike, his smile serene. That is the poison of silence. It will unravel you from the inside out. Your brilliant light will be eaten by the beautiful, perfect nothing. As the numbness spread, a new presence tore through the very walls of the estate. The roof of the grand hall was ripped away as if by an invisible hand. A colossal figure blotted out the moon, its sheer size and pressure dwarfing everything else in the city. Two immense, glowing blue eyes looked down, filled with an ancient, predatory intelligence and a cold, burning rage. A voice, female, powerful, and utterly furious, boomed through the sky. Shaking the very foundations of Kyoto. Who dares wield a shard of my horde? A beam of pure, azure energy, impossibly dense and powerful, lanced down from the heavens. It wasn't aimed at Naruto or Phantasm. It was aimed directly at the shard of the void sea. Phantasm's serene smile finally broke. He shrieked, a sound of pure panic, and poured all of his power into the shard, creating a barrier of absolute nothingness. The azure beam struck the barrier. For the first time, a sound echoed through the night, the scream of reality itself being torn apart. The entire estate, the entire city, trembled on the brink of oblivion. From the sky, a figure descended, moving with the speed of a thunderbolt. It was a woman of stunning beauty, with long, flowing indigo hair and piercing azure eyes that glowed with power. She was dressed in a revealing, dark blue outfit that did little to hide a figure that was the epitome of feminine power. Two massive, draconic horns curved from her head, and behind her. A majestic, reptilian tail swished with barely controlled fury. This was not a chaotic, emotional dragon like Tohru. This was a being of pure, regal authority. A monarch. She was Tiamat, the Karma Dragon. One of the 5 dragon kings. She ignored everyone else, her furious gaze locked on Phantasm. You, worm, you stole from me. Phantasm was sweating, the shard eye, and his hand flickering wildly as it tried to repel her assault. Dragon King Tiamat, this is a holy crusade of the Master. You will not interfere. Your master is a thief, and so are you, Tiamat snarled. She raised a hand, and the azure energy beam intensified, the barrier cracking. Give me back what is mine. Naruto watched, the creeping numbness from the poison slowing his reactions. He saw the two new players. Saw the shard that was the source of Phantasm's power. He saw Yasaka and Tohru struggling in their chains. He had to end this. Now, he focused, pushing past the poison, forcing his will into the world. He reached out not with his hands, but with his command over space itself. Hold. The world froze. Tiamat's beam stopped inches from the cracking shield. Phantasm was locked in his rictus of fear. Even the motes of dust in the air were frozen in place. Only Naruto could move. He walked forward, his steps slow and deliberate, each one a battle against the unmaking poison in his veins. He walked up to Phantasm, looked at the terrified expression frozen on the assassin's face, and then looked at the shard. He reached out and plucked the shard of the void sea from Phantasm's grasp. The moment it was free, the shard pulsed violently, unleashing a wave of raw, untamed nullity in all directions. Tiamat's eyes, the only other thing in the room that seemed to be able to move, widened in horror. An uncontrolled discharge would wipe Kyoto off the map. But Naruto was prepared. He brought his other hand up, the one suffused with his golden creation energy, and clasped the shard between his palms. He didn't try to destroy it. He didn't try to suppress it. He did what he did best. He sought balance. The golden light of creation flowed into the abyssal darkness of the shard. The violent, chaotic unmaking was met with a gentle, persistent will to be. He wasn't fighting it. He was calming it. He was teaching the storm how to be still, showing the void that it could coexist with the star. The violent pulsing subsided. The shard's hungry darkness receded, becoming a stable, dormant sphere of perfect black, held safely between his hands. Naruto released his hold on time. The world lurched back into motion. Tiamat's beam, its target gone, dissipated harmlessly. Phantasm, deprived of his weapon and power source, staggered back, his milky eyes wide with utter disbelief. Quote, he harmonized with the void. Impossible. Before anyone could react, a shadowy portal tore open behind Phantasm. Hooked chains shot out, embedding themselves in his shoulders and dragging him backward. The master is displeased with your failure, a new, deeper voice echoed from the portal. But the data you have gathered is invaluable. We will meet again, anomaly. Phantasm was dragged screaming into the portal, which snapped shut, leaving only silence behind. As the immediate threat vanished, the chains of somnus binding Yasaka and Tohru dissolved into dust. They slumped to the ground, panting. The psychic ordeal having taken its toll. The great hall was in ruins. The elders were beginning to stir, groaning as they woke from their forced slumber. And in the center of it all stood Naruto, holding the now pacified shard. Facing down the still furious Dragon King. Tiamat landed softly, her azure eyes fixed on the shard in his hands, then on him. Her rage was tempered now with a sliver of disbelief and a great deal of grudging respect. You controlled it, she stated, her voice a low rumble. No god or devil can do that. They can only seal it or try to destroy it. What are you? My name is Naruto, he said. His voice strained. The poison was still spreading. His vision was starting to blur at the edges. And this, he held out the shard, I believe is yours. He took a step to offer it to her, but his legs buckled. The world tilted, the faces of Yasaka and Tohru rushing toward him filled with alarm. The last thing he saw before the darkness claimed him was the surprised and strangely intrigued face of the indigo-haired Dragon King. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. Waking to a full house. The first thing he was aware of was the scent of cherry blossoms and medicinal herbs. The second was the gentle, rhythmic pulse of life energy flowing into him, a warm and steadying current that chased the last vestiges of a profound, soul-deep chill from his being. Naruto's eyes fluttered open. He wasn't in his own quarters. The ceiling above him was a mosaic of dark, polished wood, intricately carved with images of celestial dragons and wise old foxes. He was lying on a soft, thick futon in a large, airy room. The morning light filtering softly through a paper screen. The air itself hummed with a potent, benevolent power. He turned his head. Yasaka was kneeling beside him, her eyes closed in concentration. One hand resting gently on his chest. A soft, golden aura enveloped her, and he could feel it was from her that the healing energy flowed. She looked weary. Dark circles were visible beneath her eyes. And her usually perfect posture was slumped with exhaustion. Yet she persisted, a steadfast guardian against the encroaching silence that had poisoned him. On his other side, a frantic, whispered argument was taking place. For the last time, Tohru-san, he is not going to eat your tail. A young kitsune healer hissed, holding Tohru back by the arm. But it's packed with regenerative properties. Tohru insisted, her own emerald tail twitching with agitation. She held it in her hands, presenting it like a prize-winning sausage. It's delicious and nutritious. It would purge any lingering poison in an instant. It's the highest honor a dragon can bestow upon their master. He is not your master, and we have the situation under control with traditional Ukiah healing arts. The healer retorted, HMPH, your traditional arts have taken 3 days. A single bite of my tail and he'd be up and wrestling Oni by now. Naruto blinked. 3 days. He had been unconscious for 3 days. A third presence in the room made itself known, not by sound, but by sheer, overwhelming pressure. Standing by the large, open window that overlooked the city, silhouetted against the morning sun, was Tiamat. Her arms were crossed over her ample chest, her indigo hair stirring in the breeze. She hadn't moved, her azure eyes fixed on the street below, but her attention was a palpable weight in the room. She was a queen in a foreign court, a predator waiting with unnerving patience. The sound of his stirring, slight as it was, cut through the room's tension. The argument ceased. Yasaka's eyes snapped open, relief washing over her face so completely it was like watching the sun break through clouds. Naruto dono, she breathed, her hand instinctively tightening on his chest for a moment before she drew it back. You are awake. Thanks to you, Naruto said, his voice a little hoarse. He sat up, feeling a phantom ache where the psychic blade had struck, but the creeping numbness was gone. His own power, the twin currents of gold and violet, was flowing smoothly once more. You look exhausted. It is nothing, she dismissed, though her weariness was plain to see. The poison, it was not a physical substance. It was conceptual, a piece of anti-existence. My healing arts could only encourage your own life force to fight it back. It was a close battle. Master Naruto. Tohru shoved the healer aside and bounced to his bedside, her eyes shining with unshed tears of relief. You're okay. I was so worried. I patrolled the estate for 72 hours straight. I narrated a very suspicious-looking crow and a postman who lingered for too long. No one was getting near you. I appreciate the diligence, Tohru, he said, managing a small smile. It was then that Tiamat finally turned. Her movements fluid and deliberate. She walked toward the futon, her gaze intense, analytical. She stopped at the foot of it, her piercing blue eyes boring into him. You are awake, she stated, her voice a low, resonant hum. Good. Now, you will tell me how you did it. Tohru immediately bristled, stepping between Naruto and the Dragon King, her arms spread wide protectively. Back off, you arrogant lizard. He just woke up. He doesn't have to tell you anything. Tiamat's eyes narrowed dangerously, a low growl rumbling in her chest. The pressure in the room skyrocketed. You are a chaos dragon. I can smell the reckless energy on you from a league away. Know your place, child, before I decide to teach you a lesson in respecting your elders. Child, Tohru shrieked, her own horns beginning to glow with emerald light. I have fought in the great wars. I have burned armies to cinders. And I have shattered continents with a flick of my tail, Tiamat countered, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. Do not test me. Enough. Naruto's voice cut through the escalating tension. It wasn't loud, but it held an absolute, unshakable authority that made both dragons pause. He looked at Tiamat, his expression serious. She's right. I'm not your subordinate to be ordered around. But I will tell you. Because we have a common enemy. Tiamat's anger subsided, replaced by a cold, calculating curiosity. She gave a curt nod. Tohru, after a moment's hesitation, huffed and backed down, though she continued to glare daggers at the Dragon King. Naruto swung his legs off the futon, feeling the solid wood of the floor beneath his feet. He took a moment, gathering his thoughts. The shard was a weapon of pure nullity. It takes, it unmakes. You can't fight nothing with something, you just give it more to erase. I didn't try to control it. I didn't suppress it. I balanced it. He held up his hands, and a sphere of brilliant gold appeared in his right, while a sphere of abyssal violet appeared in his left. Creation and destruction. Life and oblivion. I am both. I didn't add anything to the shard. I just introduced it to its opposite, and guided them to a state of equilibrium. Tiamat stared at the two spheres, at the raw, primordial forces he wielded with such casual ease. She, a being born of magic and power, could barely comprehend it. He wasn't just using power, he was power. Two opposite, fundamental powers, coexisting in one form. Impossible, she breathed, the word a whisper of pure awe. Just another Tuesday for Master Naruto. Tohru declared proudly, puffing out her chest. The shard of the Void Sea is a piece of the primordial chaos that existed before our reality was born, Tiamat explained, her gaze still fixed on Naruto's hands. My hoard is not a collection of treasures. It is a prison, a vault of apocalyptic weapons and reality-bending artifacts that are too dangerous to exist. I am their warden. That worm, Phantasm, didn't just steal a jewel. He stole a doomsday weapon. And he wasn't the first, Naruto guessed, letting the spheres of energy dissipate. Tiamat's expression darkened. No, a month ago, another piece was taken, with similar stealth and esoteric methods. The Chronos Key. Yasaka, who had been listening silently, spoke up. The Chronos Key, what does it do? It allows the wielder to manipulate localized time streams, Tiamat answered grimly. They can create time loops to study defenses, accelerate their research, even pluck knowledge or individuals from moments in the past. It is a strategic nightmare. A horrifying picture was beginning to form. A shadowy organization with god-killing assassins, capable of stealing the most well-guarded artifacts in existence. One weapon to unmake reality, another to manipulate time itself. Phantasm's attack wasn't just to kill me, Naruto realized aloud. It was a test. He was gathering data. He wanted to see how I would react to his psychic attacks, how I would handle the shard. And you showed him a power he could not have anticipated, Yasaka added, her brow furrowed in thought. Which may make you their primary target. Good, Tohru declared, cracking her knuckles. Let them come. We'll be ready for them. Fighting blind is for fools, Tiamat countered coolly. This, master, of theirs hides in the shadows. We know nothing of his location, his resources, or his true identity. We are reacting to his moves. It is a losing strategy. She was right. They were on the defensive, waiting for the next ghost to strike. It was a position Naruto had never been comfortable with. Then we stop reacting, he said, a new fire in his eyes. He stood up, a sense of purpose and clarity washing away the last of his weakness. He was no longer just a guest, a protector by chance. He was a principal in this war. We force his hand. We take the fight to him. And how do you propose we do that? Tiamat asked, a skeptical arch to her eyebrow. We cannot punch a shadow. No, Naruto agreed, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. But we can give it a reason to show its face. He looked at the spot on his neck where Phantasm had struck him. The wound was gone, healed by Yasaka's art and his own vitality. But a trace, an infinitesimal echo of that conceptual poison, remained. A psychic fingerprint. Phantasm attacked my mind. He left a back door cracked open, thinking his poison would finish the job. He was arrogant. Yasaka's eyes widened as she understood his intention. Naruto Dono, that is incredibly dangerous. To willingly open your mind to that silence. It's a risk, he admitted, but it's the only lead we have. I can use that psychic echo. Amplify it with my own power. Instead of letting him whisper into my mind, I'm going to use that connection to shout right back into his. I'm going to knock on his front door and see who, or what, answers. Tohru's eyes sparkled with excitement at the sheer audacity of the plan. Tiamat's skepticism gave way to a look of grudging admiration. It was reckless, arrogant, and utterly insane. It was the move of someone who had absolute confidence in their own power. What will you need from us? Yasaka asked, her voice firm. She did not like the plan, but she trusted the man. Her role was to support him, to ensure he did not fall. I need you to anchor me, Naruto said, his gaze meeting hers. The connection between them was palpable, a bond forged in battle and strengthened in healing. Your power is life. It is the antithesis of the silence. You will be my lifeline back to this reality if I get lost in the void. He then turned to Tohru. I need a guard. A very loud, very destructive guard. While I'm under, I'll be vulnerable. If anything tries to manifest physically, I need you to annihilate it before it can get near me. Yes, Master Naruto. Tohru saluted, vibrating with purpose. Finally, he looked at Tiamat. And I need you. You understand these artifacts. You understand the fundamental forces at play better than anyone here. I need your eyes. When I make the connection, I might only get a glimpse of something, an image, a symbol, a feeling. I need you to analyze it, to see what I might miss. Tiamat was silent for a long moment, her azure eyes studying him. He was not asking for her power, but for her wisdom, her experience. He was treating her not as a weapon, but as an equal, a fellow monarch. A slow, dangerous smile curved her lips. This was becoming far more interesting than simply recovering her stolen property. Very well, Dragon God, she said, the title rolling off her tongue with a newfound weight. Show me what you can do. They gathered in the now repaired Grand Hall. The elders had been placated, the damage restored. But the atmosphere was different. It was no longer just a hall, it was a war room. Naruto sat cross-legged in the center of the room. Yasaka knelt behind him, placing her hands on his shoulders, her golden aura flaring to life, a warm sun at his back. Tohru stood guard by the door, cracking her knuckles, a grin of anticipation on her face. Tiamat stood opposite him, her arms crossed, her eyes narrowed in concentration. This was his new reality. A kitsune queen who had offered him a home. A chaos dragon who had sworn herself to be his maid. A dragon king who viewed him as a fascinating equal. His house was suddenly, unexpectedly full. And for the first time since his rebirth, he did not feel alone. He closed his eyes, taking a deep, steadying breath. He reached inward, past the sun of creation and the serpent of destruction, and found the faint, cold whisper of the silence. Found you. Instead of pushing it out, he pulled. He fed it his own energy, amplifying the signal, turning the whisper into a shout and orking it back down the line from which it came. All right, he murmured, his voice a low rumble that only the others could hear. Let's knock on their door and see who answers. The world behind his yes dissolved into a vortex of screaming, silent darkness. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Silent Throne. The world behind Naruto's eyes was not a world at all. It was a photograph of a universe from which the subject had been carefully, meticulously cut out. There was no darkness, for darkness is the absence of light. This was the absence of absence itself. There was no silence, for silence is the absence of sound. This was an active, crushing pressure that negated the very concept of vibration. Naruto felt his consciousness, his very sense of self, stretching thin, like a drop of ink in an infinite ocean of clear, corrosive solvent. This was the domain of the silence. It was the fundamental truth of entropy given will and purpose. He pushed forward, following the psychic thread he had pulled. The non-space warped around him, resisting his presence. It did not fight him with energy or force. It fought him with pure, philosophical opposition. You should not be, it seemed to whisper from every non-direction. To exist is to suffer. To strive is to fail. Let go. Be still. Be silent. Fractured images, dredged from the deepest corners of his soul, floated in the non-void. The swing set of his lonely childhood. The look of betrayal on Sasuke's face. The crumbling bodies of his friends in the war. The illusions weren't meant to frighten him. They were meant to exhaust him, to remind him of the futility of his struggles. To make him crave the peace of non-existence. Naruto gritted his spiritual teeth. He had faced loneliness and despair his entire life. They were old, familiar enemies. He answered the void not with a shout, but with a simple, unshakable memory, the taste of miso ramen from Ichiraku. He focused on the warmth of the broth, the perfect texture of the noodles, the savory slice of pork. It was a simple, grounding truth, an anchor of sensation in a sea of nothingness. The void recoiled from this simple, profound declaration of existence. He had its attention now. A presence began to coalesce before him. It had no shape, no form. It was a wound in the fabric of the void, a focal point of sorrow and apathy. It was a psychic guardian, a griever, the warden of this silent network. It did not speak in words. It communicated in pure, undiluted emotion, a wave of absolute despair that crashed against his consciousness. It showed him visions not of what he had lost, but of what he could have had. He saw a life where his parents had survived, where Minato taught him the Rasengan on a sunny training field and Kushina braided his hair, her laughter filling their warm, sunlit home. He saw a future where he and Sasuke, as joint Hokage, led a prosperous and peaceful Konoha into a new age. The visions were exquisitely painful because they felt so real. The Griever's weapon was not hatred, but love, a twisted, weaponized love for a peace that could only be found in oblivion. All this joy leads to dust, it communicated, the feeling of loss overwhelming. Why feel it at all? Why not accept the inevitable peace? For a moment, the sheer weight of the sorrow threatened to overwhelm him. The temptation to simply let go, to stop fighting, was immense. It was the most insidious enemy he had ever faced. Then he felt it, a thread of warmth, a gentle but persistent golden light pulsing against his spiritual back. Yasaka, she was his anchor, her life force a defiant sun against this endless night. He seized that warmth, that connection. It reminded him that existence wasn't a solo struggle. Because the pain is real too, Naruto projected back, his own will crystallizing into a weapon. The struggle is what gives the peace meaning. He unleashed his own power. Not the violet of destruction, that would only feed this void. He unleashed the gold, the sun of creation at the core of his being erupted. Not as a violent explosion, but as a gentle dawn. He didn't fight the Griever's despair. He illuminated it. He filled the void with his own truths. The pride on Ruka's face when he first mastered a clone. The rough, calloused feel of Jiraiya's hand on his head. The fierce loyalty in Hinata's eyes. The shared laughter with his friends. The smiles of the villagers he had saved. Each memory was a star being born in the empty sky, each a defiant declaration that life, with all its pain and joy, was worth experiencing. The Griever shrieked, a silent, psychic scream of agony. The golden light of creation was anathema to it, the concept of a meaningful struggle a poison to its philosophy of serene apathy. The formless wound began to unravel, its despair overridden by Naruto's indomitable hope. With a final, desperate surge, the Griever lunged, not at Naruto's memories, but at his very connection to the physical world, trying to sever Yasaka's lifeline. Naruto was ready. He let the tendril of despair pass through his golden aura, and as it did, he grabbed it with a thought, wrapping it in the coils of his other power. The abyssal serpent of destruction. If creation was poison to the Griever, destruction was its native language. But Naruto's destruction wasn't the messy, hungry void of the silence. It was a perfect, ordered, absolute end. He did not absorb the Griever or fight it. He simply introduced it to a more perfect, more absolute form of its own ideal. The Griever paused, its psychic assault halting. It felt completion, a final, perfect silence. And then, it was gone, unmade by a superior form of nothingness. The way was clear. With the Guardian gone, Naruto plunged deep into the heart of the network. He had only seconds before the entire system collapsed or locked him out. Information flooded his senses, not as data, but as symbolic torrents. He saw a throne room, vast and cold, carved from a single piece of obsidian that seemed to absorb all light. The throne was massive, imposing, and utterly empty. There was no master sitting upon it. But behind the throne, a symbol was seared into the stone, a slow, mesmerizing black spiral. Like a galaxy collapsing into a singularity. His perspective shifted. He was looking at the Chronos key. The artifact pulsed with temporal energy, but it wasn't on display. It was the centerpiece of a horrific machine. A captured being, a high-ranking fallen angel with 12 jet black wings, was suspended in a cage of light. The key would activate, and the fallen angel would die, screaming as a beam of energy vaporized him. Then, with a click, time would reverse, and the fallen angel would be alive again, unharmed, his memory wiped, ready for the experiment to be run once more. They weren't just killing him. They were dissecting his death, moment by moment, studying the very essence of a divine being's soul as it was extinguished, over and over again. The clinical, detached cruelty of it chilled Naruto to his core. His vision fractured again. He caught a glimpse of other projects. Souls being forged into psychic weapons. DNA of legendary beasts being spliced into grotesque chimeras. And a final, terrifying image. A map of the world, with 3 locations glowing with a malevolent red light. Kyoto was one. The other 2 were Asgard and the underworld. The network began to collapse. A psychic black hole threatening to pull him in and trap him forever. The empty throne seemed to call to him, offering him a place in the coming silence. No thanks. I've got a full house. He found Yasaka's golden thread and pulled with all his might. Naruto's eyes snapped open. He gasped, a deep, shuddering breath, his body drenched in a cold sweat. The grand hall was silent, save for his own ragged breathing. Yasaka slumped against his back, her energy spent, her breathing heavy but steady. Her role had been vital. Without her, he would have been lost. Tohru was standing over a puddle of sizzling black ooze near the door. A wisp of emerald smoke curling from her fist. Her eyes were blazing with protective fury. A physical manifestation of the Griever's last effort had tried to intrude, and she had, as promised, annihilated it. Tiamat had not moved, but her azure eyes were wide, boring into him with an intensity that could crack stone. Report, she commanded, her voice tight. Naruto took a moment, his mind racing to process the conceptual horrors he had just witnessed. Their leader, the master, he isn't a person on a throne, he said, his voice low and grim. The throne is empty. The silence might not be a who. It might be a what. An ideology, a force. He described the black spiral symbol, the horrific time loop experiment on the fallen angel, and the strategic map. As he spoke, Tiamat's expression grew progressively darker, her regal composure cracking to reveal a cold, ancient fury. They are vivisecting a Cadre-class fallen, she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. Azazel will go to war over this if he finds out. She paused, her mind clearly connecting unseen dots. And the time loops, that's how they do it. That's how they learn to bypass any security system, any divine protection. They have infinite time to practice. They're preparing for a multi-front war, Yasaka said, having regained some of her strength. She pushed herself up, her face pale but resolute. Asgard, the domain of the Norse gods. The underworld, the realm of the devils. And the yokai of Kyoto. They are targeting the major pantheons and factions. This is an extinction-level threat, Tiamat stated. The gravity of her words settling over the room like a shroud. They aren't trying to conquer. They are trying to sterilize the universe of all divine and supernatural life. This was bigger than they had imagined. This wasn't a rogue faction. This was a carefully planned, philosophically driven crusade of annihilation. Before they could contemplate their next move, the doors to the grand hall slid open with force. A yokai guard, a Tengu with panicked eyes, skidded to a halt and bowed low. Yasaka-sama, forgive the intrusion, he squawked, his voice tight with urgency. A delegation has arrived unannounced at the Grand Torii Gate. They bear the crest of the House of Grimoire. Tohru tilted her head. Grimoire, are they a type of pastry? They are devils, Tiamat growled, her eyes narrowing. And not just any devils. Grimoire is one of the highest-ranking noble houses in the underworld. Their heiress is the sister of the current Lucifer. Yasaka's brow furrowed. What would the sister of a Satan want in Kyoto? Naruto knew. The psychic shockwave he had sent out, his knock on the door, had been the equivalent of a multi-megaton explosion in the supernatural world. It was a beacon, and it had drawn the attention of a superpower. They aren't here for a social call, Naruto said, standing up. The weariness of his psychic dive was still on him, but a new, steely resolve was hardening his expression. They're here to investigate the massive power surge that just originated from the middle of your city. They're here for me. The political chessboard was no longer a distant concern. It had just been delivered to their doorstep. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. A Devil's Due. The Grand Torii Gate that marked the formal entrance to the sacred grove. Uns of Kyoto was a colossal structure of vermilion-painted wood, a landmark that had stood for centuries as a symbol of the yokai's sovereignty. It was a place of power, warded by seals so ancient and complex that even a high-ranking god would find them difficult to bypass unnoticed. Which made the group standing before it all the more unsettling. They hadn't tried to bypass the wards. They had simply announced themselves. A polite knock on a door they could have, with some effort, kicked down. It was a political statement, a gesture of respect that was simultaneously a declaration of their ability to disrespect it at will. Naruto stood with his companions on the wide, stone-paved path leading to the gate. He had thrown on his simple black coat over dark pants, his presence a calm anchor in the swirling currents of tension. To his right, Yasaka stood in her full Miko regalia, her expression regal and unreadable, the leader of her people facing an unwelcome delegation. To his left, too, Hru vibrated with barely suppressed hostility, her maid outfit a comical contrast to the predatory gleam in her draconic eyes. Tiamat lingered a few paces behind, a portrait of utter boredom, as if proceedings were a mildly interesting place she might walk out of at any moment. Before the gate stood 6 figures. At their head was a young woman of stunning beauty, with a cascade of crimson hair that seemed to defy gravity and eyes the color of a summer sky. Her figure was accentuated by a form-fitting school uniform that seemed oddly out of place, yet she wore it with the innate authority of a queen wearing her coronation robes. This was Rias Grimori, and the raw, crimson aura of the power of destruction that clung to her was like a signature of her royal bloodline. Flanking her was a raw, ven-haired priestess with a sultry smile and an aura of crackling lightning, a handsome blonde knight with a hand resting casually on the pommel of his sword, a small, white-haired girl eating a chocolate bar with a deadpan expression, and a brown-haired boy in a matching uniform who looked completely and utterly overwhelmed, his eyes wide as he stared at Yasaka's 9 tails, then Tohru's horns, then Tiamat's, everything. Rias Grimori. Yasaka's voice was formal, carrying across the space between them without being raised. Heiress to the house of Grimori and sister to the Mao Lucifer. This is an unexpected, and unannounced, visit. Quote, Rias offered a smile that was both charming and sharp, a politician's grace honed by demonic heritage. Yasaka Dono. My apologies for the intrusion. A matter of some urgency has arisen. A few hours ago, a wave of power erupted from this location. A power so immense it was felt from the underworld to the highest heavens. It felt draconic, yet it was something new. My brother, Searsex, sent us to respectfully inquire as to the nature of this event. Her blue eyes slid past Yasaka, past Tohru, and settled on Naruto. She had seen powerful beings before. She lived among them. But this was different. He wasn't radiating power like a beacon. He was simply present, and the world seemed to bend around him, the very air stilling in his vicinity. He was a gravitational constant, a law of nature in human form. Her instincts, the honed senses of a high-class devil, were screaming at her. One part of them screamed threat, a primal, existential danger. The other, the part that recognized power and nobility, was tempted to kneel. You've come a long way for a question, Naruto said, his voice calm and even. It wasn't a challenge, just a simple observation. Yet it shifted the entire dynamic of the conversation. It took the focus off Kyoto's event and placed it on their intrusion. Rias's smile didn't falter, but her eyes sharpened. When a new star appears in the sky, it is wise to learn if it will offer light or simply burn the world. You are that new star, are you not? I have a name, Naruto replied. It's Naruto. Just Naruto. The blonde knight, Kiba, asked, his tone courteous but probing. Is there a problem with that? Tohru snapped, taking a half step forward, her fists clenching. A low growl rumbled in her chest. Maybe you should sta. Say your own business before questioning his name, you pretty boy devil. Tohru, Naruto said, not even looking at her. The single word was enough. She instantly clamped her mouth shut, though she continued to shoot venomous glares at the Grimori peerage. Rias's gaze flickered to Tohru, then to Tiamat. She recognized Tohru's energy signature as a powerful dragon, but Tiamat was something else entirely. The Dragon King wasn't even paying attention to them, her gaze lazily scanning the sky as if searching for an interesting cloud. But the sheer, suffocating pressure of her ancient aura as a physical weight on Rias's shoulders, making her own power of destruction feel like a candle flame in a hurricane. She felt a bead of sweat trickle down her back. They had walked into a den of dragons, and the one they had come to see might not even be the most powerful among them. My apologies for my servant's outburst, Rias said, skillfully regaining her composure. She gestured to her companions. This is my peerage, my queen, Akano Himahima, my knight, Yuto Kiba, my rook, Kaneko Tuju, and my pawn, Issei Hyodo. Issei, who had been muttering something about a harem dream come true, snapped to attention and bowed awkwardly. A pleasure to meet you. Tiamat finally deigned to look at them, her azure eyes sweeping over the group with dismissive arrogance. Her gaze lingered for a half-second on Issei. A flicker of something, recognition, annoyance, before she dismissed him entirely. You have a Welsh dragon residing in your pawn, Grimoire, Tiamat stated, her voice a low rumble that vibrated in their bones. An interesting choice. Tell me, has DxD's incessant whining about his rival driven you mad yet? Issei's jaw dropped. Rias in her peerage froze. She had not only identified the boosted gear, but she had spoken of the heavenly dragon within it as if he were a noisy neighbor. That voice, a deep, draconic voice echoed from the red gauntlet that suddenly appeared on Issei's arm. It can't be, Tiamat. What are you doing here? Tiamat smirked, a sharp, predatory expression. I go where I please, Red Dragon Emperor. Unlike you, I am not sealed inside a mortal toy. The casual power play was devastating. In a few short sentences, Tiamat had established a level of authority so far beyond them it was almost comical. She had turned their strongest piece, the wielder of a Longinus, into a flustered child being addressed by his mother's terrifyingly powerful friend. Rias understood. This was not a negotiation between equals. This was an audience. The power surge, she said, forcing herself to get back to the point, her voice tight. What was it? It was me, Naruto said simply. He felt no need to lie or obfuscate. His existence was now a fact of this world. I was reaching out to some people who owed me a call. They were rude. I had to knock a little louder than I intended. Reaching out? Akeno asked, her voice a sultry purr, a hint of lightning crackling at her fingertips. Era. It must have been quite the conversation to shake the foundations of the world. She gave Naruto a smile that promised both pleasure and pain. Naruto met her gaze, his cosmic eyes betraying no reaction to her charm. The people I was calling are a threat. Not just to me, or to Kyoto. To everyone. To you. That got their attention. A threat. Kiba pressed, his friendly demeanor gone, replaced by the sharp focus of a warrior. What kind of threat? The kind that vivisects high-ranking fallen angels in a time loop just to see how their souls unravel, Naruto said, his voice dropping, becoming as cold as the void he had just walked. The kind that steals apocalyptic weapons from the horde of a dragon king. The kind that is preparing for a war of DxD. Annexion against every major faction in existence. He let the words hang in the air. He saw the flash of disbelief, followed by dawning horror, on their faces. Rias's skin went pale. The mention of IGH ranking fallen angel was not something one said lightly. You have proof of this? Rias demanded, her voice losing its political grace, becoming sharp and urgent. I have the memory of it, Naruto replied. And I have this. He held up his hand, and for a fleeting second, the image of the black, collapsing spiral seared itself into the air before them, a psychic imprint left on reality itself. Kaneko, the small rook, flinched back, her cat ears flattening against her head. That feels bad, she whispered. It is the symbol of a group that calls itself the Silence, Yasaka explained, her voice grave. They attacked this city 3 days ago. Naruto Dono repelled them. Rias stared at the fading symbol, her mind racing. This was far beyond a simple power assessment. This was intelligence of the highest possible importance. Her brother needed to know. The entire supernatural world needed to know. Why are you telling us this? She asked, her blue eyes searching his face, trying to find the angle, the hidden motive. We are devils. You are something else. We are not allies. You're right. We're not, Naruto agreed, and his honesty was more disarming than any lie. But right now, the house is on fire. I don't care who helps me put it out, as long as they're holding a bucket of water and not a can of gasoline. I'm telling you this because this enemy, the Silence, will come for you eventually. And I would rather you be fighting them instead of wasting my time by poking around my home. His words were a dismissal and an offer, a warning and a challenge, all in one. He had laid his cards on the table, but only a few of them, and in doing so, had forced her to show her own hand. Rias was no fool. She recognized the truth in his power and the gravity of his warning. She had owned here expecting a potential rival to be put in their place. Instead, she had found a new global superpower, an impossibly powerful alliance of beings, and the revelation of an enemy that threatened their very existence. I see, she said, her mind reeling with the political implications. I will deliver this information to my brother immediately. Good, Naruto said, with a nod. It was a nod of dismissal. The audience was over. One more thing, Rias said, her pride compelling her to regain some semblance of control over the situation. What are you? The power we felt. It registered as a dragon god. A concept we thought was only a myth. Naruto looked at her, then at Yasaka, who had offered him a home. At Tohru, who had offered him her absolute, if chaotic, loyalty. At Tiamat, who watched him with the critical eye of a true equal. A small, genuine smile touched his lips. I'm the guy who's building a new home, he said. And I don't like uninvited guests. Now, if you'll excuse us, we were about to have lunch. With that, he turned and began walking back toward the estate. Yasaka inclined her head in a final, formal farewell to Rias before turning to follow him. Tohru shot the devils one last triumphant, smug glare before skipping after Naruto, already chattering about what she would cook. Tiamat was the last to move. She gave Rias a final, condescending look, a silent warning that this place was now under her notice, and by extension, her protection. Then she too turned and followed, the four of them forming a cohesive unit of unimaginable power, leaving the Grimoire peerage standing in their wake. Issei stared after them, his mind completely blown. Prez, what just happened? Did we just get told off by, like, 4 different kinds of gods? Rias didn't answer. As watching Naruto's back as he walked away. He hadn't postured. He hadn't threatened. He had simply been. He had commanded the entire situation with an effortless charisma and an authority that was as natural as breathing. He had given her world-shaking intelligence and then dismissed her as if she were a minor functionary. She had come to Kyoto to confront a mystery. She was leaving with a terrifying new reality. The game had changed. The board was larger than she had ever imagined, and a new king had just placed his piece on it. Everyone, she said, her voice quiet but firm, a new, steely resolve in her tone. We're leaving. We have to get a message to Searzex. Now. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Valkyrie's Plea. The oppressive weight of the Grimoire peerage's presence vanished the moment they teleported away. The air at the Grand Torii gate seeming to rush back in to fill the void. For a long moment, the only sound was the gentle rustle of leaves in the ancient cedar trees. Tohru broke the silence, stretching her arms above her head with a satisfied groan. Well, I'm glad they're gone. So stuffy. And that crimson-haired girl looked at you like you were a steak dinner, Master Naruto. Naruto simply chuckled, the tension of the confrontation draining away. Let's just hope the message gets through. I'd rather not have every devil with a title showing up for an inspection. They will not be so foolish again, Tiamat stated, her tone laced with a finality that brooked no argument. She had already begun walking back toward the estate, her long indigo hair fanning out behind her. They have felt a fraction of our collective power and received a warning of a far greater threat. They will be busy. As they walked the stone path back to the main residence, Yasaka moved to walk beside Naruto. Her expression thoughtful. You handled that with unexpected diplomacy, Naruto Dono. You thought I was going to punch them? He asked with a wry grin. The thought had crossed my mind, she admitted, a small, tired smile gracing her lips. You revealed our hand. You told them about the silence. You gave them crucial intelligence freely. Why? Because a secret is only a weapon if you're the only one who knows it. Naruto explained, his gaze distant. I only saw a glimpse of their plans. I don't know their numbers, their leader, or their main base of operations. Hiding that glimpse does nothing for us. But sharing it turns the entire supernatural world into a neighborhood watch. Now, every faction will be looking for a black spiral. Every strange disappearance, every stealth attack, will be viewed through the lens of my warning. We just deputized the planet. Yasaka's eyes widened slightly at the simple, profound strategic brilliance of the move. He hadn't just given away information. He had weaponized it, turning his enemies' secrecy against them on a global scale. He thought not like a warrior, but like a cage. When they returned to the estate, the quiet Fasian sea of the Yukai servants had already erased any sign of the previous night's battle. The grand hall was immaculate, the air serene. But the four of them knew it was now the command center for a war that had not yet officially begun. They gathered around the low table where the elders had sat just the night before. This time, there was no pretense of a meal. This was a council of war. Asgard and the underworld, Tiamat began. Her voice a low rumble as she took a seat, her presence dominating one side of the room. Ambitious targets. The underworld is a labyrinth of shifting territories and political intrigue. Defended by the 72 pillars and the Mao. A frontal assault is suicide. They will use stealth and assassination, targeting key figures. Like that fallen angel, and Asgard, Naruto prompted. Tiamat's expression was grim. Asgard is a fortress, a warrior realm built on a floating continent, protected by Odin's runes and the Bifrost. Its defenses are more direct. To attack Asgard is to challenge the Norse pantheon to open combat. It is a bold, almost arrogant, strategy. Unless they don't attack it head-on, Naruto mused, leaning forward, his elbows on the table. Fant. ASM didn't try to fight me with raw power. He used illusions, psychic attacks, a weapon that negated my own energy. They're assassins and saboteurs, not soldiers. So they will use a similar strategy against Asgard, Yasaka concluded. Find a weakness in their defenses, a seam in their armor, and strike at the heart. We need more information, Naruto said, a familiar frustration in his voice. Quote, I'm tired of waiting for them to make a move. We know they're targeting 3 factions. We're one of them. We should be reaching out to the others, forming a coalition. Odin is prideful and Circex. Lucifer is a master of political calculation, Tiamat warned. They will not easily accept an alliance with an unknown power, even with the Grimoire girl's report. They will investigate. They will send their own envoys. It will take time, and they will want concessions. We don't have time, Naruto countered, his voice flat. As if to punctuate his statement, the very air in the center of the room began to tear. It wasn't a teleportation circle, clean and precise like the devils used. This was a violent, desperate rip in the fabric of space. A swirling vortex of rainbow-hued energy and screaming. Static-filled winds erupted in the middle of the hall. It smelled of ozone, blood, and cold, empty space. Tohru was instantly in front of Naruto, a shield of chaotic green energy flaring to life. Yasaka's hands were already weaving signs, golden light coalescing around her. Tiamat simply watched, her azure eyes narrowed, recognizing the chaotic, untamed energy signature. The Bifrost, she breathed. Or a shattered piece of it. A figure was violently ejected from the portal, tumbling through the air before crashing onto the wooden floor in a heap of metal and torn fabric. The portal snapped, edged shut behind them with a sound like shattering glass, leaving a lingering scent of the void. The figure was a woman. She was clad in battered, scorched silver armor, intricately carved with the likeness of wolves and eagles. A magnificent helmet shaped like the wings of a swan was cracked, one wing broken clean off. Her long, platinum blonde hair was matted with blood and grime. In her hand, she clutched the hilt of a shattered sword. The blade a jagged shard of glowing metal. She was grievously wounded, a deep, ugly gash across her abdomen weeping a golden, shimmering blood, the ichor of a god. She pushed herself up with a groan, her one good arm trembling with the effort. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sky, blazed with a warrior's defiance and a desperate, hunted fear. She scanned the room, her gaze falling on the 4 beings of immense power staring down at her. I made it, she gasped, her voice hoarse, a trickle of golden blood running from the corner of her mouth. I am Sigurd, Shield Maiden of Asgard, Valkyrie of the All-Father. She tried to get to her feet, to stand with the dignity of an envoy, but her legs gave out. She collapsed to one knee, her head bowed in exhaustion and pain. Naruto was beside her in an instant, his earlier frustrations forgotten, replaced by the instinct of a protector. He knelt in front of her, his presence calm and reassuring. You're safe here. What happened? Sigrun looked up at him, at his strange, slitted eyes that seemed to hold galaxies within them. She felt the benevolent, life-giving aura he projected, a stark contrast to the life-devouring horror she had just fled. Tears of relief and despair welled in her eyes. They came from nowhere, she choked out, her words tumbling over one another in her haste. Out of the cracks in time. One moment, We were patrolling the Vanaheim border. The next, the sky turned to black glass. Tiamat's eyes narrowed. The Chronos Key. The fortress of Himmelbjorg, where Lord Heimdall guards the Bifrost, it was isolated. Sigrun continued, her body racked with tremors. Cut off. We were on the outside, and we saw it happen. A black spiral appeared in the sky, and the fortress was encased in a bubble of distorted time. We could see moments replaying themselves over and over. A guard falling, then getting up, then falling again. A flag tearing in the wind, then mending itself, then tearing again. She was describing the time loop. The same horrific methodology they had used on the fallen angel, but on a macro scale. They hadn't just attacked the fortress, they had read it in a temporal prison to be dissected at their leisure. My squadron, the Einherjar, we tried to break through, she said, her voice cracking with grief. But they were waiting for us. Creatures. They weren't alive. They were echoes. Grievers, they called them. They didn't fight our bodies, they fought our souls. They showed us our greatest triumphs, turning them to ash. They showed us Valhalla, burning. They fed on our valor. On our hope, turning it to despair. This was Phantasm's art, weaponized for an army. They had a weapon, Sigrun gasped, clutching the gash in her side. A spear that radiated silence. It did not cut. Where it struck, things just stopped. The life, the magic, the very story of what it hit, was erased. Lord Tyr himself met them on the field, and the spear, it took his arm. Not severed, it just wasn't there anymore. Her breathing was becoming shallow, her divine energy fading fast. Heimdall. Before the bubble closed completely, he saw a light, she whispered, her gaze locking onto Naruto. A golden light, shining from across the realms. A power that defied the silence. He used the last of his strength to shatter a fragment of the Bifrost, to forge a path to the light. He sent me, to warn you. To plead for aid. They are dissecting the gateway to the 9 realms. If they unlock the secrets of the Bifrost, they can go anywhere. No realm will be safe. She had delivered her message. Her duty was done. Her strength finally gave out, and she pitched forward, collapsing into Naruto's arms, unconscious. The hall was silent, the weight of the Valkyrie's testimony pressing down on them all. This was no longer a cold war fought in the shadows. The first open battle had been waged, and Asgard, one of the mightiest military forces in existence, had suffered a devastating blow. Yasaka knelt, her hands already glowing with golden light as she began the arduous process of healing a wounded goddess. Tohru stood frozen, her usual chaotic energy replaced by a cold, simmering rage. Even Tiamat had a grim, murderous look in her eyes. The theft of her property had been an insult. This was an atrocity. Naruto gently laid the unconscious Valkyrie on the floor, allowing Yasaka room to work. He stood up, his face set like stone. The pieces were all there. The time manipulation, the soul-devouring grievers, the weapons of unmaking. The silence was not just a threat, it was a plague. He had wanted to take the fight to them. Now, the fight had chosen its next battlefield. He looked at his companions. At Yasaka, the steadfast healer and queen. At Tohru, the furious, loyal warrior. At Tiamat, the ancient, pragmatic monarch. This was his council. This was his faction. His family. Tohru, he said, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the silence. Prepare yourself. We're going on a trip. Where are we going, Master Naruto? She asked, her voice low and eager for battle. Yasaka, he turned to the Kitsune Queen. Can you stabilize her? We're taking her with us. She can guide us. I can, Yasaka affirmed, her focus entirely on the wounded Valkyrie. He then met Tiamat's gaze. There was no need for a question. He could see the answer in her azure eyes. The promise of draconic retribution. He turned his gaze toward the ceiling, as if he could see past it, past the sky, and into the war-torn realms beyond. We're going to Asgard, he declared, his voice ringing with an absolute, unshakable resolve. And we're going to show the silence what happens when they knock on the wrong door. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Bifrost burns. The decision, once made, settled over the grand hall with the weight of an impending storm. There was no celebration, no boastful cries of war. There was only a quiet, grim determination, a shared understanding of the precipice upon which they stood. Yasaka's hands glowed with a fierce, concentrated light as she worked over the unconscious Valkyrie. The gash in Sigrun's side, a wound inflicted by a weapon of pure nullity, was not healing in a conventional sense. It was a hole in the Valkyrie's very story, and Yasaka was painstakingly reweaving the threads of her existence, her golden life energy, a stark contrast to the conceptual void of the injury. "I can stabilize her," Yasaka said, her voice tight with concentration, sweat beading on her brow. "But the journey will be taxing. Her life force is tied to Asgard. The further she is from it, the weaker she will be." "She doesn't need to be strong," Naruto said, his gaze fixed on the wounded warrior. "She just needs to be a beacon." He turned to Tiamat, who was studying the intricate carvings on Sigrun's battered armor. "Asgard is not a welcoming place for uninvited guests," the Dragon King warned, her azure eyes meeting his. "Especially not for dragons. Odin is ancient, paranoid, and absurdly powerful. His runic magic can unravel the laws of reality. His warriors, the Einherjar, are the spirits of the greatest mortal heroes, their valor a tangible weapon. They will see my presence as an invasion, and yours," she nodded at Tohru, "as a chaotic infestation. So, no fireballs until the second introduction." "Got it," Tohru said with a mock salute, though the usual cheer was absent from her voice. A cold fury had settled deep within her, the sight of the wounded Valkyrie offending her warrior's pride. "We're not going there to make friends," Naruto stated, his voice leaving no room for argument. "We're going there to put out a fire. If they're smart, they'll hand us a bucket. If not," he let the sentence hang, the implication clear. He walked over to Yasaka. Kneeling beside her, he placed a hand gently on her shoulder, and she leaned into the touch for a brief, weary moment. The unspoken burdens of leadership passed between them. He was leaving, venturing into another realm to fight a conceptual war, and she had to stay, to protect their home and manage the inevitable political fallout of his actions. "Kyoto is in your hands," he said softly. "It always is," she replied, a faint, tired smile on her lips. She reached into the folds of her Miko robes and produced a small, intricately woven charm of white and red silk, a tiny golden bell attached to it. "This is a Goshin Fuda, a sacred charm, linked to the heart of the Shinto ley lines that run beneath this city. It is tied to my own life force. As long as it is whole, you will have a thread connecting you back to this place. A way home." She pressed it into his hand. It was warm, pulsing with a gentle, steady rhythm that was a perfect echo of her own energy. It was a promise, a lifeline. Naruto closed his hand around it, the warmth spreading through him. "Thank you, Yasaka." Their eyes met, and in that moment, the bond between them solidified into something deeper than mere alliance. It was a bond of absolute trust, of shared responsibility. A quiet, profound intimacy that needed no further words. He stood, the charm secure in his pocket. He looked at his war council. The fiercely loyal Chaos Dragon. The ancient and pragmatic Dragon King. "Let's go," he said. He placed his hands on the unconscious Sigrun's shoulders. He didn't search for a location, a set of coordinates in the vastness of the cosmos. He searched for the echo of her home, the desperate, dying resonance of the Bifrost energy that still clung to her like a shroud. He found it, a jagged, screaming wound in the fabric of the multiverse. He pulled. Space did not bend or fold. It tore. A vertical rift of shimmering, chaotic gold and violet energy ripped open in the center of the hall. The two halves of his power twisting together to form an unstable, violent doorway. It did not lead to a tunnel of light, but to a nauseating glimpse into the raw, unformed space between realms. Colors that had no name bled into sounds that should not exist, the psychic screams of dying stars mixing with the whisper of nascent galaxies. Tohru looked into the maelstrom, her draconic senses reeling, and gave a low whistle. "Well, that's one way to travel." Naruto carefully lifted Sigrun into his arms, her head lolling against his shoulder. He gave Yasaka one last, reassuring nod and stepped through the rift. Tiamat and Tohru followed a half-step behind, the portal snapping shut with the violence of a guillotine, leaving Yasaka alone in the sudden, deafening silence of the hall. The journey lasted an eternity and no time at all. They were adrift in a sea of raw potential, their physical forms struggling to hold together against the conceptual tides. Then, Just as suddenly as it began, it was over. They did not step out of the portal. They were violently ejected, stumbling forward onto solid ground under a sky of shimmering, liquid gold. They were in Asgard, and Asgard was at war. They stood on a vast, grassy plain, the earth trembling with the distant shock of titanic impacts. In the distance, a city of impossible beauty, all gleaming golden spires and majestic halls, was surrounded by a dome of shimmering runic energy that flickered like a dying candle. But closer, perched on a colossal mountain that seemed to touch the sky, was the source of the conflict. The fortress of Himinbjorg, home of the Bifrost, was encased in a bubble of glitching, stuttering light. It was a temporal prison, moments of battle replaying themselves in a sickening, silent loop on its surface. The field before them was a scene of valor and despair. Legions of Asgardian warriors, the legendary Einherjar, clad in shining silver armor, fought with the disciplined fury of heroes. Their axes and swords, glowing with holy light, cleaved through shadowy, bestial creatures that rose from the very ground. But their main enemy was not the beasts. Floating among the battle lines were the grievers, formless voids of sorrow that latched onto the Asgardian warriors. Naruto watched as a towering, bearded Einherjar roared a challenge to the heavens, his fighting spirit a brilliant beacon, only to falter as a griever enveloped him. The warrior's roar died in his throat, his axe lowered, his face contorting in sudden, soul-crushing grief as the griever forced him to relive the moment of his mortal death, the betrayal of a brother. The loss of his family, his valor, the very source of his power, was being siphoned away, turned into a feast of despair. His light dimmed, and the shadow beasts, sensing his weakness, swarmed and overwhelmed him. This wasn't a battle, it was a spiritual plague. Their arrival, a violent tear in reality, did not go unnoticed. A squadron of Einherjar, their shields locked together in a defensive wall, turned to face them. Their leader was a grizzled warrior with a formidable white beard and a single, piercing blue eye that had seen 1,000 battles. He hefted a massive, rune-etched battle axe. More demons, he snarled, his voice a gravelly boom. His gaze fell upon Tiamat, whose draconic pressure was an affront to this holy realm, and then to Naruto, who held one of their own. A broken Valkyrie, in his arms. You dare bring one of our fallen before us as a trophy. For this insult, you will die. The Einherjar raised their spears, their fighting spirit coalescing into bolts of pure light. Before the standoff could erupt into a pointless battle, a shadow fell over them. A new entity had joined the fray, a griever of immense size, a true focal point of apathy and hopelessness. It was a despair lord, and it directed its attention to the shield wall, unleashing a psychic wave of utter futility. The Einherjar sagged, the light on their weapons flickering as visions of Ragnarok, of their world's final, inevitable death, flooded their minds. Naruto didn't waste another second on words. He gently laid Sigrun on the soft grass, her breathing shallow but stable. He stood up, turning to face the encroaching wave of despair. Tohru, Tiamat, physical threats, he commanded, his voice sharp and clear. The rest are mine. He clapped his hands together in a single, sharp motion that echoed like a thunderclap. He then slammed his open palms onto the sacred soil of Asgard. There's enough sorrow here already, he declared. Let's try a little hope. A wave of pure, incandescent gold erupted from him. It was not a destructive force. It was the conceptual opposite of the grievers, despair. It was the warmth of the first sun on a cold world, the joy of a child's first laugh. The unshakable loyalty of a comrade in arms. It was life, in its most potent, undiluted form. The wave washed over the battlefield. The shadowy beasts hissed and dissolved, their forms unable to exist in such a purely positive energy field. The grievers shrieked, their essence of despair and apathy neutralized, overridden, and utterly annihilated by the sheer, overwhelming force of Naruto's will to live and protect. But the most profound effect was on the Einherjar. The psychic wave of gold washed over them, and the crippling visions of despair were shattered, replaced by the memories of why they fought. They remembered the pride of being chosen by the Valkyries, the camaraderie of the feasting halls of Valhalla, the love for the realm they had sworn to protect. Their valor, which had been turned into a poison, was now reignited, amplified, blazing brighter than ever before. Minor wounds closed, exhaustion fled, and their fighting spirit roared back to life. A collective inferno of renewed heroism. While Naruto purged the spiritual plague, his companions dealt with the source. The Despair Lord, seeing its minions erased, materialized a legion of new shadow beasts. Behemoths of solidified grief with claws of sharpened regret. Tohru met them with a roar of pure, chaotic fury. She opened her mouth and unleashed a torrent of emerald green fire, not as a chaotic blast, but as a perfectly controlled, scything wall of annihilation that incinerated the entire legion in a single, sweeping pass. There wasn't even ash left. The Despair Lord itself recoiled, turning its full power on the two dragons. But it never got the chance to attack. Tiamat, who hadn't moved from her spot, simply lifted a single, elegant finger. "Insolent shade," she stated, her voice cold with contempt. A beam of pure, azure energy, thinner than a needle but containing the compressed energy of a collapsing star, shot from her fingertip. It pierced the very center of the Despair Lord. There was no explosion. The Despair Lord just stopped. Its form, a vortex of spiritual despair, was utterly and completely annihilated, erased from existence by a power that was simply on a higher dimensional plane. The battle, which had been a grinding, desperate struggle for the Einherjar, was over in less than 10 seconds. The one-eyed commander and his squadron stared, their weapons held slack in their hands. The field was silent, save for the gentle hum of Naruto's fading golden aura. The new arrivals, the beings they had been ready to condemn as demons, had just saved them. With a casual display of power that defied comprehension, they had not just won the battle, they had cleansed the entire battlefield and rekindled the very souls of its warriors. The commander slowly, cautiously, lowered his axe. He walked forward, his single eye wide with a mixture of suspicion, awe, and a profound, warrior's respect. "Who, in the name of the All-Father," he breathed, his voice filled with disbelief, "are you?" Naruto turned to face him, his cosmic eyes calm, his posture relaxed. "We're the help," he said simply. As the words left his lips, a new presence descended upon the field. It wasn't a violent arrival. It was a simple appearance, as if the world itself had parted to allow it passage. A brilliant, rainbow-hued light shone down from the heavens, and from it, a figure emerged. He was an old man, with a regal beard as white as snow that flowed down over a chest plate of gleaming gold. He wore a magnificent winged helmet, and his face was a mask of ancient wisdom and authority, marked by a single empty eye socket. In his hand, he held Gingnur, a spear that pulsed with a power that seemed to sing in harmony with the realm itself. This was Odin, the All-Father, King of Asgard. He had not teleported, he had simply decided to be here, and the universe had complied. His single, piercing eye was not filled with rage or fear. It swept over the cleansed battlefield, the stunned Einherjar, the broken form of his Valkyrie, and the three beings who stood at the center of it all. Finally, his ancient, impossibly wise gaze came to rest on Naruto. He wasn't looking at a stranger or an invader. He was looking at a fellow king who had just entered his court unannounced, not by kicking down the door, but by saving the guards posted before it. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. An Alliance of Kings. Odin's presence was not like Tiamat's oppressive, predatory aura or Naruto's dualistic, elemental force. It was quieter, yet somehow more vast. It felt as if the very ground they stood on, the golden sky above them, and the wind that whispered across the plains were all extensions of his will. He was not merely a king in a realm, he was the realm. His single eye, a pool of ancient starlight and accumulated wisdom, held no malice. It held the weary, calculating gaze of a monarch who had seen empires rise and fall like the turning of the seasons. He looked at Naruto, holding his gaze for a long, silent moment. "A king assessing a king. You are not of the 9 realms," Odin stated, his voice a low baritone that resonated with the authority of ages. It was not a question. "Your power feels primordial, unwritten." "I'm new," Naruto replied simply, the honesty of the statement more effective than any grand title or declaration would have been. "And you," Odin's gaze shifted to Tiamat, "are the Dragon King of Karma. It has been millennia since your kind meddled in the affairs of Yggdrasil. Your presence here is more surprising than the attack itself." Tiamat met his gaze without flinching, a ghost of a smirk on her lips. "The thieves who plague your realm stole from my hoard. My meddling is a matter of pest control, All-Father." Odin's eye flickered with understanding. This was not an invasion. This was a convergence of powerful interests, a posse of gods gathering to hunt a common wolf. He looked at the cleansed battlefield, at the renewed vigor of his Einherjar, who were now cautiously approaching, their expressions a mixture of awe and reverence. He looked at the unconscious Sigrun, now breathing steadily, the worst of her conceptual wound sealed by an alien power. He had been at a strategic impasse, his greatest warriors and wisest mages unable to counter a spiritual and temporal assault. And then, a solution had literally torn a hole in reality and fallen into his lap. Pride was a luxury he could not afford. "You have saved the lives of many of my sons this day," Odin declared, his voice booming across the plain. He struck the butt of his spear, Gingnir, against the ground. And the earth itself seemed to hum in affirmation. "This is a debt that Asgard will not forget." He turned back to Naruto. "You called yourselves the Help. The time for talk on an open field is past. Come, be my guests at Valashulf. We will speak of war, and of kings." Without waiting for a reply, he turned, and the space before him shimmered. A grand, golden archway appeared where there was only grass a moment before, revealing a hall of impossible scale within. He strode through it, a clear and undeniable summons. The one-eyed Einherjar commander bowed his head deeply to Naruto. "My thanks, Lord," he said, the title given with a soldier's simple, profound respect. He then barked orders, and a team of healers swiftly moved to tend to Sigrun, lifting onto a floating stretcher of pure light to be spirited away for proper care. Naruto exchanged a look with Tiamat and Tohru. The first test was over. They had established their power and their intent. Now came the harder part, politics. They stepped through the archway and into Odin's personal hall. The chamber was vast, its ceiling a living tapestry of swirling nebulae and distant galaxies, a perfect real-time representation of the cosmos. A single, imposing throne of silver and ancient wood stood at one end, but Odin did not take a seat. He stood before it, Gingnir in hand, turning to face them as an equal. Not as a superior receiving subjects. "Sigrun is awake," Odin began, wasting no time. "My healers have confirmed her story. A temporal prison, soul-devouring shades, a weapon that erases existence. This enemy, the silence, their methods are an abomination of all the laws of magic and nature. It's how they operate," Naruto confirmed. "Stealth, misdirection, and conceptual warfare. They avoid direct confrontation whenever possible." "A coward's strategy," Tohru scoffed, her arms crossed. "No," Tiamat countered, her voice sharp, correcting the younger dragon. "A scientist's. They are not fighting a war. They are conducting an experiment. They trapped your fortress in time so they could dissect its defenses, learn the secrets of the Bifrost, and test their weapons against your warriors. All with the ability to rewind and repeat their tests an infinite number of times. It is a ruthlessly efficient method of gathering intelligence." Odin's single eye darkened, the fury of a king whose people were being used as lab rats radiating from him. "My seers cannot pierce the temporal shell. My runes unravel upon contact with it. It is a perfect prison, both from the outside and the inside. Heimdall and the garrison within are trapped, forced to relive the initial moments of the attack endlessly." This was the crux of the problem. Asgard's greatest strength was its direct, overwhelming power. Both magical and martial, but that power was useless against a fortress that was no longer in their time stream. "So we can't break it down from the outside," Naruto mused, his gaze turning inward. His mind already dissecting the problem. "And to attempt to teleport inside would be suicide," Odin continued. "You would materialize into a maelstrom of temporal shear, your being scattered across 1,000 different moments in time before you could even draw a breath." A grim silence fell over the hall. They had won the battle on the plains, but the strategic situation was a complete and utter checkmate. Naruto walked to one of the great open arches of the hall, looking out at the distant, stuttering light of the captured fortress. He felt the weight of the moment, the lives trapped within. The threat to all the realms. He also felt the gentle, warm pulse of the charm in his pocket. Yasaka's charm, a connection to his home. An anchor, an idea, audacious and utterly insane, began to form in his mind. "You can't teleport into the storm," Naruto said, thinking aloud. "But what if you didn't teleport? What if you just walked in?" Odin and Tiamat both turned to look at him. "You speak in riddles," Son of the primordial, Odin said, his tone curious. The bubble is a prison of time, Naruto explained, turning back to face them. But it still exists in space. It occupies a physical location. Your teleportation magic and Bifrost travel rely on traversing space and time simultaneously. That's why they fail, but my own method of travel is different. He held up his hand, and a small, perfect sphere of violet nothingness coalesced in his palm. I don't travel through space. I command it to bend. I can create a rift, a direct, physical doorway from one point to another. Ignoring the intervening distance, Tiamat's eyes widened slightly in understanding. You intend to punch a hole through reality directly into the heart of a temporal anomaly. The spatial stress would be astronomical. It's a brute force solution, Naruto admitted. But it bypasses the time aspect entirely. I'd be opening a door from my now, directly into there, now, however trapped it may be. Odin stroked his long, white beard, his single eye boring into Naruto with an intensity that could read a man's soul. Even if you could create such a rift, how would you navigate it? You would be entering blind. And how would you return? The rift would collapse behind you. You would be trapping yourself to save them. It was a valid, fatal flaw in the plan. And it was the moment Naruto laid the rest of his cards on the table. He looked at Tiamat. Your perception is beyond the normal spectrum. You can see the flow of magic, of souls. Can you sense the temporal shear? The walls of this prison? Tiamat closed her eyes for a long moment. The air around her shimmered. Yes, she said, her eyes snapping open, a faint azure glow within them. It is a chaotic mess. But I can perceive its boundaries. I could, theoretically, guide your rift to the most stable point within the anomaly, the eye of the storm. Naruto then looked at Odin. I need you to do what you do best, All-Father. I need you to hold the line. Once I'm inside, the silence will know. Their forces outside the bubble will attack with everything they have to stop you from supporting me. I need you to give me time. Finally, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the small, silken charm Yasaka had given him. He held it up. The tiny golden bell gave a faint, melodic chime that seemed to echo with the warmth of a distant home. And this, he said, is how I get back. He met Odin's questioning gaze. It's an anchor, a connection to my own realm, my own place in the flow of existence. It doesn't matter where I am, or even when I am. As long as I hold this, I will always have a path home. The plan was laid bare. It was a three-pronged assault, relying on a level of cooperation and trust between three disparate, immensely powerful beings who had met only an hour ago. It was a plan built on Naruto's unique reality-warping power, Tiamat's esoteric senses, and Odin's raw, overwhelming might. Odin was silent for a full minute, the weight of his decision pressing down on the very cosmos depicted on his ceiling. He looked at the confident dragon god, the ancient dragon king, and the fiercely loyal chaos dragon. He saw not arrogance, but competence. He saw a chance, where moments before there had been none. His single eye gleamed with a newfound, dangerous light. A spark of the old warrior king, the berserker who had conquered the 9 realms, returned to his face. A slow, grim smile spread across his lips. The bards will sing of this day, Odin declared, his voice a low, rumbling thunder. Either of the folly of a mad god, or of the birth of the most powerful alliance this cosmos has ever seen. He hefted Gingnir, and the spear blazed with a light so bright it outshone the nebulae on the ceiling. Assemble your warriors, he boomed, his voice carrying far beyond the hall, a command to his entire realm. We will hold the line. The alliance was sealed, not with a treaty or a handshake, but with a shared, impossible goal. They stood once more on the plains, but this time they were at the base of the mountain upon which Himenbjorg sat. Legions of Einherjar and Valkyries assembled behind them. A shining sea of silver and gold, their battle lust a palpable force. Odin stood at their head, a king ready to lead his people into battle. Before them, the time-locked fortress loomed, a monument to the enemy's power. The surface of the bubble shimmered, showing silent, looping images of the initial attack, Asgardian warriors charging, exploding, and reforming in an endless, horrifying cycle. Tiamat closed her eyes, her head tilted as if listening to a silent song. The temporal currents are weakest at the apex of the dome, directly above the central watchtower. It is a chaotic focal point, but it is your best entry. Tohru cracked her knuckles, emerald sparks flying. Just say the word, Master Naruto. Anything that tries to stop us gets turned to charcoal. Naruto looked up at the shimmering dome. He took a deep breath, the cold, clean air of Asgard filling his lungs. He felt the weight of the gazes behind him, the hope of an entire realm resting on his shoulders. He closed his hand around Yasaka's charm, its steady warmth a silent reassurance. He was a long way from home, but he was not alone. Let's begin, he said, and the world began to tear apart at his command. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. Heart of the Anomaly. Naruto did not gather energy. He did not weave signs. He simply raised his hands towards the shimmering temporal dome, palms open, and pushed. Not against the air, but against the fundamental constants of space. The world screamed. A sound like grinding continents and tearing stars ripped through the air as a hairline fracture of pure, absolute nothingness appeared before him. It was a perfect, vertical line of black that absorbed the golden light of Asgard's sky. He pushed harder, and the line widened, not with a smooth expansion, but with a series of violent, stuttering jerks. As if reality itself was fighting back against the violation. Odin and the assembled Einherjar watched in stunned silence. This was not magic as they understood it. This was a force of nature. A living being treating the fabric of the universe like a piece of paper to be torn. Now, Tiamat, Naruto grunted, sweat beading on his brow. The spatial resistance was immense. Like holding two repelling poles of a magnet the size of a mountain. Tiamat's eyes glowed with azure light. She raised a hand, and a thin, precise beam of blue energy shot from her fingertip, not at the dome, but at the rift Naruto was creating. The beam struck the edge of the tearing space and acted like a guide, a laser scoring a line on a piece of glass. It stabilized the chaotic energies, guiding the tear upward, directly toward the apex she had identified. The rift widened into a jagged, unstable doorway, a swirling vortex of violet and black. Through it, they could see the impossible, the inside of the temporal prison. It was a chaotic storm of temporal shear, moments of the past, present, and potential futures colliding in a kaleidoscopic nightmare. A warrior's last breath hung in he air next to the image of a seed sprouting into a tree in an instant. A scream echoed backwards. Tohru, with me, Naruto commanded. He didn't hesitate. He leapt through the doorway, into the heart of the temporal storm. Tohru was right behind him, her face a mask of fierce determination, her draconic power flaring to life to protect her from the chaotic energies. The moment they were through, the rift began to collapse. The strain too much to maintain. King of Asgard, Tiamat's voice boomed across the plain, her gaze still fixed on the closing rift. Your part begins now. She was right. The moment Naruto's rift proved that the prison was not inviolable, the silence responded. From the shadows of the surrounding mountains, from cracks in the very earth, they emerged. Legions of shadow beasts, far larger and more monstrous than the first wave, swarmed the plains. Above them, dozens of despair lords materialized, their collective aura of hopelessness a psychic tidal wave that crashed against the Asgardian host. And with them came their commander. He did not fly, he simply stood in the empty air, a tall, gaunt figure clad in robes the color of a dead star. His face was hidden behind a smooth, porcelain mask that depicted a single, weeping eye. In his hand, he held a long, gnarled staff topped with a frantically spinning cage of brass and silver. Trapped within it, screaming silently, was the miniature, spectral form of the 12-winged fallen angel. This was the source of their power, a divine soul being used as a battery for their obscene arts. This was a warlock of the silence. Odin's single eye blazed with a fury that made the heavens tremble. For Asgard, he roared, and the sound was the breaking of the storm. He pointed Gungnir at the warlock, and a beam of pure, divine energy. The concentrated wrath of a king shot across the battlefield. The warlock simply tapped his staff, and a shimmering barrier of distorted time appeared before him, the beam splashing harmlessly against it like a wave against a cliff. Your courage is a disease, old man, the warlock's voice echoed, a dry, rasping sound like crumbling gravestones. We have come to offer the cure. The battle for Asgard began in earnest. The Einherjar, their souls still burning with the golden light Naruto had gifted them, charged. They met the wave of despair not with fear, but with a defiant, joyous rage. The true spirit of the berserker awakened. Tiamat, her duty as a guide fulfilled, turned her attention to the despair lords. A cold, predatory smile graced her lips. This was not a battle. This was an extermination. Inside the temporal prison, the world was a nauseating symphony of chaos. Naruto and Tohru landed on the central watchtower of Himenbjorg, a platform of rune-etched stone that was, as Tiamat predicted, the relative eye of the storm. All around them, temporal sheer flowed like a river, images of the past and future whipping by. The Asgardian garrison was frozen, caught in the single, looping moment of the initial attack. Lord Heimdall, his hand outstretched to grasp his great horn, Yallarhorn, was locked in a tableau of perpetual warning, his eyes wide with a horror he was forced to relive for eternity. Master Naruto, what do we do? Tohru asked, her senses overwhelmed by the temporal chaos. The enemy isn't the storm, Naruto said, his cosmic eyes scanning the environment, seeing not the chaos, but the structure beneath it. The storm is just the cage. We need to find the lock. He closed his eyes, extending his senses, searching for the source, the linchpin of the temporal effect. He found it, at the base of the tower, where the Bifrost Bridge itself was meant to connect to the fortress. There was a focal point. A black, pulsating tumor of temporal magic, anchored by a familiar, horrific device. The Chronos Key. It was embedded in the Bifrost's control pedestal, pulsing with a sickening, anti-chronological energy, forcing the local timeline to fold back on itself again and again. Guarding it were 4 figures, the true architects of this prison. They were not grievers or shadow beasts. They were 4 warlocks of the silence, identical to the one Odin now faced outside. Each wearing the same emotionless, weeping eye mask. They were the jailers. There you are, Naruto whispered. He and Tohru leapt from the tower, landing silently on the platform below. The 4 warlocks turned in unison, their masked faces showing no surprise. It was as if they had been expecting them. The anomaly, one of them rasped. You have entered the equation. Your arrival was calculated. Good. Then you calculated that you're about to get your asses kicked, Tohru snarled, her fists wreathed in emerald fire. Your chaos is an irrelevant variable, another warlock stated, his voice devoid of emotion. The experiment is nearing completion. We have gathered all the data we require on the Bifrost's resonant frequencies. You're done killing these people over and over again? Naruto asked, his voice dangerously low. Correct, the 3rd warlock replied. The final phase is sterilization. The temporal loop will be collapsed into a single point, eras. In this fortress and everyone in it from the timeline entirely. He raised his staff. Your presence here is a fortunate coincidence. We will now gather data on the unmaking of a dragon god. The 4 warlocks attacked. They didn't use energy blasts or physical strikes. They manipulated the very battlefield. One waved his staff, and the ground beneath Tohru aged 1,000,000 years in a second, crumbling to dust and dropping her into the abyss below the fortress. Another pointed at Naruto, and a beam of accelerated time shot towards him, intent on aging him to dust before he could react. Tohru roared in fury, her dragon form erupting in a blast of wings and scales as she took flight, escaping the trap. Naruto, meanwhile, didn't even move. He simply held up his left hand, the abyssal violet of destruction swirling in his palm. The time acceleration beam struck his palm and was simply erased. Utterly and completely unmade. My turn, Naruto said coldly. He vanished, not with speed, but by folding space. He appeared directly behind the warlock who had attacked him. Before the warlock could even register his presence, Naruto placed a hand on his back. He didn't blast him with energy. He simply flooded the warlock's being with a torrent of pure, undiluted life force. For a being dedicated to the silence, to the philosophy of non-existence, the raw, joyous, chaotic energy of pure life was the ultimate poison. The warlock's dark robes began to smolder, his form unable to contain the positive energy. He let out a choked, horrified gasp as his own power was overridden. With a final, silent implosion, he was gone, leaving only his weeping eye mask to clatter to the floor. 1 down. The remaining 3 reacted instantly. They synchronized their power, their staves pointing at the Chronos key. They began to chant in a language that was not a language, a series of discordant notes that made the very air bleed. The key pulsed violently, and the temporal storm intensified, the loop beginning to collapse. The frozen figures of Heimdall and the other Asgardians began to fade, their forms becoming translucent. They were being erased from history. Master Naruto, they're speeding it up. Tohru yelled, unleashing a massive fireball that was swallowed by a hastily erected time shield. Naruto knew he didn't have time to fight the other three warlocks. He had to stop the key. He focused, pushing past the temporal chaos. His will a singular, unstoppable point. He reached out with his power, not to destroy the Chronos key, but to do what he did best. Balance. He felt the key's power, its unnatural pull on the timeline. Forcing it backwards. He didn't fight it, he simply introduced an opposing, equal force. He projected his own will into the local timeline, a gentle but irresistible command to move forward. Past and future, reverse and forward, two equal, opposite forces met, with the Chronos key and Naruto as their fulcrums. The effect was instantaneous. The violent temporal storm stopped. The chaotic winds ceased. The whipping images of past and future vanished. The entire inside of the dome was plunged into a perfect, absolute stasis. A moment of perfect zero, where time did not exist. The frozen figures of the Asgardians solidified, their erasure halted. The three remaining warlocks froze, their chant cut off, their power source neutralized. Only Naruto and Tohru, anchored by his will, could still move. Whoa, Tohru breathed, looking around at the perfectly still world. What did you do? I hit the pause button, Naruto said, his voice strained. The NT of focused will required to hold the timeline of an entire fortress in stasis was monumental. He walked past the frozen warlocks, straight to the control pedestal. He looked at the Chronos key, the source of all this suffering. Pulsing with a malevolent light, he reached out and wrapped his hand around it. He felt the cold, alien power of the artifact, the sheer wrongness of its existence. He could destroy it, unmake it with a thought. But that wasn't his way. Destruction was a tool, not a solution. He poured his own energy into the key, the golden light of creation, and the violet void of destruction. Not in conflict, but in perfect, harmonious balance. He wasn't overpowering the key's magic. He was tuning it. He was taking the singular, discordant note of reverse, and teaching it the rest of the song. He was turning a weapon of temporal manipulation into a simple, inert object. The key's malevolent light faded, replaced by the soft, neutral glow of dormant magic. The hum of its power ceased. Naruto pulled it free from the pedestal. The lock was broken. He released his will. Time, freed from its prison, snapped back into place with the force of a tidal wave. The temporal dome shattered into a billion shards of golden light. The figures of Heimdall and the other Asgardians unfroze, their looping moment completed, their memories of the endless cycle a fading nightmare. The three warlocks, their power source gone and their spell broken, were violently thrown back by the temporal whiplash, their bodies dissolving into dust. High above, the golden sky of Asgard, clear and bright, returned. Heimdall fell to one knee, gasping, as the Yallarhorn finally fell into his grasp. He looked up at Naruto, who stood before him holding the now inert Chronos key, his presence the very definition of a savior. Outside, the battle ceased. The remaining shadow beasts and grievers dissolved as their masters were destroyed and their power source neutralized. The last warlock, seeing the dome shatter and feeling the connection to his comrades sever, let out a sound of frustrated rage. Before Odin or Tiamat could strike him down, he was consumed by a portal of black shadow, retreating from a lost battle. Silence fell over the plains of Asgard. Then, from the assembled legions of Einherjar, a single cheer went up. It was followed by another, and another, until the entire realm was filled with a single deafening roar of victory and gratitude, a sound that shook the foundations of the Golden City. Naruto stood on the Bifrost platform, the cheers of a realm washing over him. Tohru landed beside him, a massive, proud grin on her face. He looked at the Chronos key in his hand, then out at the grateful faces of the warriors he had just saved. He had come to this world alone, a ghost of a dead planet. But now, standing at the crossroads of the 9 realms, he was anything but. He had allies. He had a home to return to. He had a purpose. The silence had tried to erase a piece of history. Instead, they had just witnessed the birth of a legend. Chapter 10 End.